Magandang hapon po. Annyeonghaseyo. Good afternoon, good evening, and good morning to everyone who is tuned in right now. Welcome to the second half of the day one of the 8th Philippine Korean Studies Symposium. I am Ria Rafael from the Department of Linguistics, and I will be your moderator for this part of the symposium. We are delighted to welcome our participants joining us today in the safety of their homes through Facebook and YouTube live streaming. This event is co organized by the UP Korea Research Center and UP Department of Linguistics and sponsored by the Korea Foundation. We also wish to thank our followers and supporters and wish to express gratitude that you all always help us make our events more meaningful. And so, before we begin our afternoon program, we would like to remind our viewers of some house rules. You may send your questions and comments to our panelists throughout the event in the comment sections of our YouTube and Facebook pages. Kindly introduce yourself with your affiliation when raising questions. The questions will then be collected and answered during the open forum. We are also reminded that the whole forum is a safe space and thus will not tolerate any form of bullying and trolling, academic or otherwise. The organizers reserve the right to remove those who will create any disruption in any part of the program. We would also like to inform you that this event Hello. Okay. So we will have two students presentation, and both speakers are from the alumni from the UP Department of Linguistics. We will have Mr. James Manrique as our first speaker. James is a Korean language teacher at the Polytechnic University of the Philippines and at King Sejong Institute, Quezon City. He's also a graduate student at the UP Department of Linguistics, and his primary research interests include language education, Korean language and linguistics, and language variation. James will be sharing with us how Filipino learners acquire Korea as a foreign language through a um, description and analysis of errors in the learner's interlanguage. While you are watching the video presentation, feel free to post questions or comments that will be answered and addressed later during the open forum.
Good day, everyone. I am James Manrique, and I will be presenting on the error analysis of the interlanguage of Filipino learners of Korean as a foreign language. Well, how did we get here? Korean isn't really a global language per se, but there is a rising interest in learning the language among Filipinos over the past decade. First, working in Korea is lucrative, and foreigners are required to pass a practical Korean language test to be eligible to work in factories. Second, Korea has become an international cultural power through Hallyu, and Hallyu fans are interested in learning the language. Many institutions offer Korean language courses such as KCC, KSI, UP, Ateneo, PNU, and PUP, among others. Furthermore, in 2018, DepEd announced that through the special program in foreign language, Korean will be one of the 5 languages to be taught in select junior high schools in the country. With the increasing number of Filipino learners of Korean, you'd expect that KFL acquisition research would also be booming. However, ESL was and still is king in the Philippines. With regard to foreign languages, most studies only explore learner motivations. If you look outside the country, there are a lot of KFL research like in the US, China, Japan, Malaysia, Myanmar, Thailand, etc. This research now aims to fill this gap. Moreover, the present study may also help both Filipino language teachers and learners of Korean, and that it can A. Inform language teachers where the learner is in terms of their language learning progress and what steps to take in order to increase learners' proficiency, and B. Make language learners aware of the errors that they commit, thus giving them the opportunity of using these errors as tools to improve their correction and feedback. The study aims to provide relevant quantitative and qualitative explanations on patterns of errors present in the written interlanguage of Filipino learners of Korean. By attempting to identify these errors in written text of Filipino learners of Korean across different target language proficiency levels, and classify these errors according to type, level, and occurrence rate. Many studies use interlanguage and error analysis and exploring learner language and target language acquisition. Since we also want this research to be comparable with existing studies in the field, we also employ the same frameworks. If we look at second language acquisition as learning, like learning a first language instead of teaching, we can look at errors or deviations from a target language as a normal stage of a person's linguistic development. Error analysis helps tell the language teacher how far towards the goal the learner has progressed, the researcher how language is learned or acquired, and the language learner what to improve on. We differentiate a mistake, which reflects language performance, from errors which are systematic and reflects language competence of a learner. The data for this research was collected in May 2021 with the help of students enrolled in Korean language courses offered by the UP Department of Linguistics during the academic year 2020-2021. Students were divided into 3 proficiency levels: beginner, intermediate, and advanced, based on the highest level of Korean language course the student has taken. For beginner, students were asked to write short compositions in Korean following prompts that I have provided. I also personally identified and classified the errors in the data. For intermediate and advanced, however, students were asked for copies of written compositions submitted as course requirements. Since there is already teacher feedback for these compositions, these were used to identify the errors, and so I only needed to classify them. Error categories are as follows. For type, omission, addition, selection, and ordering. For level, orthographic, grammatical, and lexical. A quantitative analysis was also done to compare the frequency of occurrence of different error types across proficiency levels. Let's look at some numbers. A total of 38 compositions containing 644 sentences were collected from 16 students. As seen in this table, 59.47% of the sentences have at least one error. For beginners, 54.47%. For intermediate learners, 51.13%. And for advanced learners, 70.59%. Error Density Index, or EDI, seen in the last column, is a metric that compares the number of errors a learner committed with the number of sentences they produce. A perfect composition, or a composition with no errors, has an EDI of 0. We can see that beginners have, on average, 1.1 mistakes per sentence, intermediate learners 0.81, and advanced learners 1.78. So here, we can see that advanced learners make twice the number of errors as intermediate learners. We'll get back to that in a bit. Let's first look at the errors in detail. After identifying the errors, we now classify them according to type. First, We have omissions. An error of omission is committed when an item that must be present in a well-formed utterance is absent. We distinguish them from both ellipsis and zero, which are allowed by grammar. First, omission of space. Korean has spacing rules as well, as seen in this example. Second, omission of particles. Particles are postpositions usually added to nouns, typically marking case. Korean particles are kind of weird. In writing, they are required to be present, but in speech, they can be dropped. Not dropping particles in speech can sometimes make you sound stiff, but since we're analyzing written compositions, we look for them. Next, omission of complementizers. Korean has a relatively more complicated direct and indirect quotation strategy, so this can be quite difficult for learners. Omission of conjunction and transitional devices. As with any good writing, transitional devices make your thoughts more coherent. Errors of addition are the opposites of omissions. They occur when an item that should not appear in a well-formed utterance is present. This often occurs due to overgeneralization or too faithfully following certain rules. Unnecessary spaces often occur in noun plus verb constructions. Some Korean verbs can be broken down into its noun and verb components, and as such, learners can sometimes put space between them where there shouldn't be any. Multiple particles can be strung together to form complex meanings. However, some particles cannot be used with others, and they are, in a sense, overwritten. Learners sometimes forget to do this. Korean is quite conservative about using pronouns, only explicitly mentioning them when emphasizing or changing topic. However, pronouns in English and Filipino are important. As such, it sometimes reflects in their Korean as well. Related to particle and pronoun dropping is this error of redundancy. Korean is a context dependent language. Once a topic has been established in discourse, you can talk without mentioning the topic and will still be understood. Here, the phrase internet language has already been mentioned in the first half, so there was no need to mention it again in the latter half. Third type of error is selection. Errors of misselection or misformation occur when the wrong form of the morpheme or structure is used. As the original definition covers only errors of grammatical extent, it is hence expanded for the purpose of this research. Misspells may be categorized as selection errors whose extent is orthographic, while substitution errors, like assumed synonymity or collocation errors, are categorized as selection errors whose extent is lexical. First, misspells. In one misspell in this example, the grapheme for the plain velar plosive kiyak was replaced with the tense velar plosive sangkiyak. Moreover, they visually appear similar, so errors of this kind is common. Borrowed words are also prone to misspellings. Here, dress must be transliterated into dress, but it was spelled dresi. In misselection of particles, cases are inappropriately marked. Here, manhwa is marked with the subject marker ga instead of the object marker re. Or the opposite. Effects is marked with the object marker e instead of subject marker e. Another common particle misselection is e versus etho. They both mark locations like Tagalog sa, but eso typically marks where an action occurs, while e marks the goal of a locomotive action. Many morphemes in Korean have two forms, alternating whether the sound preceding it is a vowel or a consonant, with some exceptions, of course. This sometimes trips learners up. As for lexical misselections, we have assumed synonymity, where items typically synonyms are used interchangeably in contexts where substitution is not applicable. Here, the conjunctions unika and umuru both mean because, but unika has a slight nuance of subjectivity, while umuru is exclusively used in formal writing. Here, pohamdada means to be included, used typically with objects, but was used to mean feel included or feel that they belong, when sosokam or sense of belonging is a more appropriate word to use. Collocation errors typically occur when idioms are translated into the target language word for word, breaking collocations. In this example, the student literally wrote feel a lot of stress when the correct collocation in Korean is receive a lot of stress. Utterances in Korean are always along a politeness spectrum. Nouns, verbs, and pronouns can change form depending on the politeness level of the sentence. Here, the sentence is written in the so-called plain style. As such, the pronoun for I must be na. However, 저, the pronoun for I in polite speech, was used instead. Here, 이랑, meaning and, is only used in speech. The written equivalent must be 과. The last type of error is ordering. An error of misordering is committed when a unit or a group of units are incorrectly placed in an utterance. Here, the subject particle is incorrectly placed in relation to the noun number counter phrase construction. Also, and only in English, can typically go anywhere in the sentence without affecting the meaning of the sentence. However, in Korean, the meaning changes depending on where you attach the particle. Here, the incorrect sentence reads, I too make music, implying that there are other people who make music too. The meaning intended was I, in addition to other things, make music too. To negate a verb which is comprised of a noun and a verb, you must split them and add the negation an between them. This is important as noun plus verb adjective is never split and the negation goes before it. Korean predicates prefer verbs and adverbs over nouns and adjectives. Here, the construction literally reads, the study is passionate, while it is more fluent to say, passionately studying. Lastly, general word order errors are committed usually when there are embedded clauses involved, such as in this example. To zoom out a bit, here is a frequency count of errors classified by type and extent, grouped by proficiency level. If you noticed from before, the total number of sentences per proficiency level is not equal. Only 20% of the corpus is from beginners. So this means that the numbers in intermediate and advanced are inflated. To make this irrelevant, we normalize these numbers using the error density index. Now, these numbers show a more accurate picture of our data. What we're trying to see here is which errors appear more often in specific proficiency levels. But there is a lot of numbers and it's a bit confusing, so we perform a Kruskal-Wallis test. A per document analysis of the dataset points us to where we can look at. Here we see what error classes have significant differences within a 0.05 level of significance in EDIs across proficiency levels. Now, let's go back to the previous table. Now we see which rows are relevant. Not only we can definitively say that given our corpus, more errors are committed by advanced learners, but also that they commit more selection, grammatical, and lexical errors. Beginner learners also commit more lexical additions. So what does this all mean? First, the computation of EBI suggests that an advanced learner is twice more likely to commit an error compared to an intermediate learner. The beginner learner's probability is only a tad bit higher than that of the intermediates. The Kruskal-Wallis H test says that the difference is significant and non-negligible. Moreover, comparisons between groups showed which errors are more likely to be committed per proficiency level. It should be noted that while the test is non-parametric, the sample size is still too small for comfort. In further researches, it is suggested to prepare a larger corpus in order to get a more meaningful quantitative analysis. While not exhaustive, we also determine the kinds of errors that appear typically in the learner's written composition. One may expect that error rates will decline as proficiency level goes up. The data suggests otherwise. We could make some inferences as to why this is the case. First, advanced learners have longer sentences. Since the EDI's denominator is the number of total sentences, it will inevitably be higher if the learner joins multiple clauses to form a single more complex sentence. Second, learners of higher proficiency know more vocabulary and grammar and may dare to generalize and play around when writing. But in doing so, they expose themselves to higher chances of committing errors. Lastly, the data on advanced learners were taken from courses that specifically aim to improve writing and reading skills. On the other hand, the courses taken so far by beginner and intermediate learners focus on oral communicative skills. Some constructions in the advanced levels may be grammatically correct and felicitous, but deemed awkward by a native speaker, hence marked as errors. Again, only expanding the corpus and having more data points will allow us to get a clearer and more accurate picture of errors across proficiency levels. Through this research, we now have an overview of the kinds of errors Filipino learners of Korean commit in written texts. Future research may now focus on specific kinds of errors in order to describe in detail how these errors arise and, eventually, how Korean is acquired by Filipino learners. Ultimately, this study wishes to serve as a starting point for further research on KFL acquisition of Filipino learners. Here are the references used in this research. And again, this is error analysis of the interlanguage of Filipino learners of Korean as a foreign language. Thank you for listening and have a great day.
Thank you, James. We'll discuss more about this interesting topic after the second presentation. So, our next presenter is Julianne Margaret Tamina. She is a BA Linguistics graduate from the University of the Philippines, Diliman, where she took up Korean as her major language. Last August 2022, she participated as the Philippine representative of the third KFJNU JDC Intensive Korean Language Program for next generation educators and underwent intensive training focusing on the Korean language and culture for 4 months. Currently, she works as a quality assurance tester with Korean, wherein she tests games and applications at a gaming company. Very interesting job. So, while you are watching the video presentation, again, feel free to post questions or comments that will be addressed later during the open forum.
안녕하세요. Hi, I'm Julian Margaret Tamina, and I'm going to share with you today my study abroad experience in Jeju with my presentation entitled Developing Cross-Cultural Values, an Immersive Experience in Jeju. So, a little bit of info about me. I recently graduated last July as magna cum laude from the University of the Philippines, Diliman, where I took up BA Linguistics and chose Korean as my foreign language. So I was actually one of the first students who took up Plan C Korean. So we were the first batch to take it and learn it. So I joined UP Arirang, an organization focusing on spreading both the Korean and Filipino culture to both Koreans and Filipinos alike. I also work part-time for UP Korea Research Center as a data collector, and I also volunteered as a Korean instructor for Kapiling language lessons, an initiative by the UP Department of Linguistics focusing on helping the COVID-19 victims. I was also the Philippine representative for the second International Korean Education Youth Camp, which I attended during my undergraduate years. So anybody could easily guess why I chose to study Korean. And yes, it is because of K-pop and K-drama. I'm a fan of BTS, I'm an ARMY, and I watch a lot of Korean dramas that I wanted to understand every single thing that they were saying. This sole reason drove me to become dedicated in learning, of course, the language and culture in totality. Social media became a tool in helping different people, including me, from various backgrounds to cross the border to connect with the Korean culture and society, and at the same time to connect with other diverse cultures as well. I felt this phenomenon with BTS, especially on Twitter, where people have this sense of communal spirit of being together as one and learning from one another despite some differences. So you could see me from the first three pictures, and it was when I went to Hong Kong to watch BTS concert last 2019, and I also met up with some of my international friends from Malaysia and Indonesia. So through BTS, we could all learn from the Korean culture and society. And at the same time, I was also learning more about the culture of other fans. So I learned a lot from my Malaysian and Indonesian friends. And a few years later, I was given the opportunity to once again hone and further enhance my cross-cultural attributes when I had the chance to study in Jeju last August 2022, which was a month after I graduated from university. So thanks to Mambi's recommendation, I became part of the third KF JDC Intensive Korean Language Program for Next Generation Educators as the Philippine representative, along with other representatives from other Asian countries such as Vietnam, Thailand, Indonesia, India, Uzbekistan, Kazakhstan, Kyrgyzstan, Sri Lanka, and Myanmar. This program, which was organized by the Korea Foundation with Jeju National University and Jeju Free International City Development Center, sought to improve the Korean skills of foreign educators and aspiring educators alike in accordance with the new Southern and new Northern foreign policies of South Korea. With this in mind, we underwent 300 hours of Korean language training, which included reading, speaking, writing, and listening classes from August to December. And we also attended various special lectures focusing on the Korean culture, pedagogy of teaching Korean, and the linguistic aspect of the language. It was really interesting and exciting to attend these kinds of lectures because I was able to understand more deeply Korean as a whole and experience a more intensive and rigorous approach in learning it. It helped that I majored in linguistics during my undergraduate years, so I have a background knowledge regarding it, and it also served as an advantage in understanding about the technicalities and system of the Korean language. Another thing that I was able to refine more were my interpersonal skills, in which I managed to smoothly communicate with other foreign trainees and learn more about them and their respective cultures. They were not that fluent in English at all, so we could only talk in Korean. I realized during that time that we all had to find that middle ground when it comes to dealing with other people, especially if their culture, lifestyle, and perspective are much different than mine. So not only was I integrating more of the Korean language and culture into my own learning, but bit by bit, I was also embracing and acquiring more knowledge about other people and their respective identities. I also learned how to form harmonious relationships with them and live and interact with them. My stay in Jeju also felt like a vacation since we had several field trips and cultural experiences. So last September, we traveled to Seoul for 3 days and 2 nights, where we went to different cultural and historical sites such as the Gwanghwamun Square, National Museum of Korean Contemporary History, Gyeongbokgung Palace, Blue House, National Museum of Korea, and Seoul Tower, Seollung Royal Tombs, Ponghunsa, and Starfield Coex Mall to further deepen and expand our knowledge about the country firsthand. We also had a session where we learned about the Korean traditional dances and instruments back in Jeju, and I got the opportunity to learn the instruments and dances, which was really entertaining and enjoyable. Furthermore, we also went on a yacht tour, which was my favorite by far because I could still remember my friends dancing to the full blasting music and eating tangerines, which was the specialty of Jeju. It was a really good time, and I could see my friends loosening up. And since I remember during that week, we were all busy preparing for our midterms, so it was a relaxing excursion. Towards the end of the program, we also went on a historical trip where we learned about the Jeju Uprising, and it was an emotional one because I learned about the struggles that the Koreans faced before that shaped the country the way it is today. And as for the last field trip that we went on, we went tangerine picking and eating them on the spot, and it was a fun one because the tangerines were really sweet and we could taste the specialty of Jeju. And we also attended the tea ceremony where we learned about the importance of tea in Korea, especially in East Asia. And we learned about the different practices and the way of eating the sides along with the tea. But I think one of the most memorable memories I have when I was in Jeju were the times when my Central Asian friends and I would go out and explore Jeju every weekend. Every trip that we had was unique and special since we could see every aspect and charm that Jeju has, and I always felt the need to show them to everyone, especially to the Filipinos. So not all Filipinos know much about Jeju, and they obviously know more about Seoul, the capital of Korea. This, which is why I feel that I need to share with them the beauty of Jeju. And I also feel like there's much more to explore in Jeju, and in the future, hopefully, more Filipinos can explore Jeju. And I think this is why Jeju has a special place in my heart. So just to share a bit of my trips in Jeju. So my friends and I would go on traditional markets to taste the Korean street food, to buy fruits, and we also went to a lot of waterfalls, and we also went to Innisfree Jeju House. So we saw firsthand the green tea field there, where uh where they would uh, use it and make most of their products that they would sell. And we got to taste the green tea ice cream, green tea latte, and different types of green tea products, which was also the specialty of Jeju. We also went to different cafes and different beaches, and I think the most beautiful one that we went to was the Udo Island. So we had to take the ferry to get to the Udo Island. But I think towards the end of the program, the most memorable trip that my friends and I went to was Mount Hala or Halasan. So, not all everybody knows this fact, but Mount Hala or Halasan is actually the highest mountain in South Korea. So it was actually my first time hiking a mountain ever in my life, and I did it uh, at the highest mountain in South Korea. So it was really difficult and challenging because my friends and I, it took us like 6 hours to reach the summit, and it also took us 5 hours to go down. So it took us the whole day just to climb that mountain. It was really tough and it was really difficult because during that day it was raining and it was so cold. We went there during the winter, so the steps were all slippery, and the path was full of rocks. So it was a struggle for me as a first timer, but nonetheless, I still liked it and loved it. I appreciated it because it's my first time hiking, and I did it in Jeju. So, aside from that, as part of our program, we had to take the topic test. I'm happy to share that I got level 5 and I'm very proud of it since it is my first time taking the test. I did not expect it at all because all throughout the program while we were preparing for the test, I struggled a lot and found it difficult at times since we had to write a lot of formal essays. We had to experience different kinds of writings, and we also had to analyze a lot of graphs. So there were really technical terms for those kinds of writings, and luckily through hard work I was able to achieve the level expected for us to reach, which was level 5, the second to the highest level of proficiency. So the training that we went through helped a lot in terms of my skills and career, since in a span of 4 months, I could easily tell that I've improved immensely. back here in the Philippines, I could not practice my Korean as much as I wanted to back in my in undergraduate years because there weren't that many opportunities for me to speak the language. I could only practice my reading, writing, and listening skills. But in Jeju, I had to speak the language only, which was a good practice since I'm now more confident, knowledgeable, and comfortable with it. This program also opened many doors for me to further grow as an individual and as a Korean speaker. Currently, I am working as a quality assurance tester with Korean, wherein I test games at a gaming company. So it is through this program that I found my bigger purpose in life, and it's not just because of K drama and BTS anymore. Because in the future, I look forward to pursuing further studies and developing more of my career where I could put my Korean skills to good use and share them with a lot of Filipinos. So that's all. Kamsahamnida. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Julian. That seemed like a really great experience, no? And I hope we have more opportunities like that for Korean learners and also other foreign language learners, no? So let me call James and Leah for the open forum. So we have some questions from our audience. And for those who wish to ask questions now, please feel free to post it at the comment section and we will try to address them. So I will be reading a few questions that have been collected throughout the session. Let's start with James, no? Dr. Ronel Laranjo from the FPP has a question. And this question is a very because of um, the terms. Now we have to be clear with the terminologies we use, especially in these types of paper. Can you elaborate more on how you identified mistakes versus errors in your data?
Yes, thank you, Ma'am Maria, for moderating our session for today. So first, I'd like to recognize Dr. Laranjo, whose master's thesis on the interlanguage of heritage learners and Korean learners of Filipino language is my biggest inspiration for my own undergraduate research. And so going back to our working definition, so a mistake is what we call a performance error that is either one random or random guess or second a failure to utilize a system that is already known by the learner. You contrast that with an error, which is a direct manifestation of an incorrect system that is learned by the student. So this is why we need a big enough corpus when we are doing an error analysis like this one. So this allows us to identify errors that I emphasize no repeated often enough in our corpus data to consider them as systematic. So that means one-off errors or yung mga konti-konti lang are considered as mistakes and not errors.
Okay, thank you. So I'd like to connect that to another question from Celsius Wanshon. He actually has three, but let's um, ask the first one. So, which of the errors do you think are greatly influenced by the learner's L1?
Ah, so one of my favorite examples of this one is the Korean locative particle. So in Korean, we have two. We have e and e서. So bear with me if you're not familiar with the Korean language, but we have two, e and e서. So in Korean, there's at least four different contexts for locatives, which call for different constructions. So many learners, what happens is they struggle to use the correct particle often when they learned it for the first time. Because in Tagalog, we only have one. We only have sa. Now, in those four contexts that I've mentioned, we all use sa or nasa. And in English, we only use in, on, and at. But in Korean, we have at least four different phrases. So that's a common example that I give out when people ask why is it difficult for Filipino learners to learn Korean. And then the second example is word order. Word order. So Tagalog is VSO language, so we start with the verb in our sentence. Kumain ng mangga. Kumain ako ng mangga. But in Korean, we have SOV. So the verb is, or the predicate is always at the end. 네, 저는 사과를 먹었어요. So literally, uh, ako manga kumain. So many learners, when they first encounter or when they first build their own first sentences, they quite get confused by that. So those are what we can call examples of interlingual transfers or L1 transfers.
That's true. No, I can relate with that because of the Japanese learners then, no? But so we continue with Mr. Juan Sean's question. The second one is, what recommendations can you give specifically on assessment, and what do you think could further explain the error density for advanced learners? So,
Okay, so very quickly for assessment, not only in assessment but also in instruction, one biggest recommendation for, say for example, dun sa example of the locatives, you should not teach that or test that on from the students at all at once. So say for example, the four our four context, our four situations, we have to split them by two. So that's what I do in my own classes. So first two muna, next week siguro yun the other two, para hindi nalilito si student, si learner, na okay, ito pala dapat, and then magbi-build up ka na lang na okay, may ganito pa palang situations where we can use the same or different particle. And for the error density for advanced learners, so there's this thing in Korean where we can start a we can start a sentence with a transitional device. Say for example, uh, I like Korean music. Period. So I study Korean. So that counts as two sentences.
mm,
But as a learner learns more of the language, you can combine that sentence into one single sentence. I learn Korean, so or I like Korean music, so I learn Korean language. So error density index is computed by dividing the number of errors by your number of sentences. So instead of dividing it by two, you just divide it by one, effectively doubling your EDI. So that is the biggest reason why technically EDI of advanced learners are higher compared to our beginner and intermediate learners.
mhm, I see. Okay. Um, okay, sige. I'll get back to you, James, no? Let's have Leah first. Baka isipin mo nakalimutan na kita. I haven't forgotten you. So, Dr. Kyungmin Bay, has a question. I am curious if there was any pedagogical discussions during the training amongst various Asian participants in terms of prospective Korean teaching.
Okay, so I would like to first greet Mambe. So Mambe, as I've mentioned earlier in my presentation, she's the one who recommended me to the program. So it is through her that I got to participate in the program. So going back to Mambe's question, so there were a lot of different types of pedagogies that were introduced to us during our special lectures. So there's visual, there's one-on-one, and there's the traditional type wherein you just teach the vocabulary, the different types of grammars and structures in Korean. And the professor actually asked us one by one the most effective type of pedagogy for us, and majority said that the visual type of pedagogy is the most effective one, in which the teacher would present or the professor would present different types of images or different types of vectors to the students, and from the native language or the first language of the students to the Korean would be presented. And it is through that activity that we learned that majority of us are actually visual types of learners, and we actually have different types of activities in which we also learn from the different Asian languages. So not just Korean, we also learned other vocabulary or different words in other Asian languages through the visual type of pedagogy.
Very interesting. Leah, were you the only one who are all the participants teachers or future teachers of.
Majority of them are Korean teachers,
Mhm,
and some of us are only students. So
mhm.
for for them, they're actually seasoned or experienced
Mhm.
educators. So for us students, we're aspiring educators.
So I was actually wondering during the presentation if, since some of you are not teachers, if the
Yes.
organization or the activities were subtly encouraging you to take up Korean language as a profession, either as a
Yes.
teacher as or as a researcher. Were there any,
Yes.
not naman pressure, no, but
Yes.
encouragement, no?
Yes.
So will
There
we be
wasn't.
seeing you in a classroom soon?
Yes, maybe soon.
Oh,
Yes, I'm
oh.
actually interested in teaching Korean, of course, in our department. And although the program did not impose on us to actually teach Korean back in our home countries, there was of course the hidden motivation to for us to pursue Korean education to further spread the language back in our countries.
Okay. As a follow up, another one for Leah. What do you think is the advantage of training with teachers of other nationalities as opposed to, say, training with fellow Filipino teachers?
I think just like what I've mentioned in my presentation earlier, so the other Asian delegates could not speak English at all, so we only had to talk in Korean. So I think that was the biggest advantage for me. So not only was I learning in the classroom more of the language, but I was also learning from them as well. So it is true that I was able to speak more of the language, practice more of it, and of course, improve a lot for it.
Mhm. Yeah, that's one of the biggest difference, no? Kasi if we are training with
Yes.
fellow Filipino teachers, the tendency would be to speak in our
Yes.
in our mother language, right, mother tongue. So
Yes.
we won't have more exposure or practice with our target language.
Yes.
One more for Leah before I move back to James. So program, did you have specific cultural experience that gave you deeper insights on the Korean language that made you appreciate the language better? Additionally, were there dialectal differences which were also taught in your program? And what are the native Koreans' attitudes towards non-standard Korean dialects? What is your
Okay. So, when we went to Seoul, so uh, that Seoul trip was provided for by the program. So everything was accounted for by the Korea Foundation. So we went to the Korean Museum. So it is through that museum that we got to know the importance of the language. So they were really trying to motivate the native Koreans to really appreciate their language and to, of course, show how significant it is in the future. And for the dialects in Korea, so we weren't actually taught the different types of dialects because we were only focusing on the standard Korean, and I think they don't have that attitude towards the other dialects in Korea because uh they seem neutral about it even when we ask our professors about it. But in
Mhm,
Jeju, I noticed that the Jeju dialect is slowly disappearing,
mhm,
and that's why the Jeju government would post a lot of Jeju phrases along the bus stop, so to encourage the
mhm,
Jeju citizens there to show importance for their dialect. And we were actually taught only one phrase in the Jeju dialect. So we have the greeting in the standard Korean, the 안녕하세요. 저는 줄리안입니다. So the 입니다 right there is the ending for when you're introducing yourself. But in Jeju, you have their mashim. So 안녕하세요. 저는 줄리안 mashim. So instead of 입니다, we have mashim. So that's a Jeju version for in the standard form of in the Korean. Yes.
Thank you. One before our last question, I'd like to ask James. No, you mentioned that for the beginners level, you gave your own prompts.
Yes.
No, did you give prompts that you think might generate errors? Being a learner yourself, na this I committed before maybe because no,
Mm.
or did you just general prompts?
The prompts, the main motivation for the prompts are looking at the topics that are taught to beginner learners. So yung mga themes, not necessarily that I know they will generate errors, but these are the topics where I know that the students or the learners have already generated sentences before in their own Korean classrooms.
I see. I see. Okay, thank you. And then last question for James. In terms, this is one is from Dr. Aldrin Lee. In terms of lexical errors, which particular type of lexical items contributes to the biggest chunk of errors, and any speculation why?
I cannot say for sure that it's the biggest contributor, but what it, in my opinion, is the most notable one, which is the collocation between nouns and verbs, or nouns with verbs. So one example that I also showed in our presentation is the phrase "I feel stressed" in English. So in English we say "feel stressed," but in Korean they literally say "I receive stress." So those um choices of words are produced because of word for word translations. So I think that collocation errors or collocation between nouns and verbs are the at least the most notable lexical errors in our um at least in the Filipino context.
Mm-mm. I think it's also very interesting because English plays a big part in the learner's interlanguage, not only just one language, the Filipino, no, but mixture of Filipino and English before they do acquire Korean patterns, no. So siguro last na yun. Very interesting topics. Thank you very much, James and Leah. We hope to hear more from your research in the next coming symposiums, no, and we also encourage students and teachers of Korean language to showcase, no, their study so that we can build this type of bigger and wider community of ano ba, Koreanists, tama ba? Hi. Okay, um so to conclude, no, this part of the program, let me read the certificate of appreciation for our two speakers. First is for James. This certificate is presented to James Dominic R. Manrique for presenting his research paper titled Error Analysis of Written Compositions of Filipino Learners of Korean as a Foreign Language at the 8th Philippine Korean Studies Symposium, organized by the University of the Philippines Korea Research Center and the Department of Linguistics at the University of the Philippines Diliman, given on the 21st of January 2023, signed by Kyungmin Bay, OIC, Dr. Kyungmin Bay, sorry, OIC Director, UP Korea Research Center, and Dr. Maria Cristina Gallego, Chairperson, UP Department of Linguistics. Okay. And of course, the certificate is presented to Miss Julian Margaret Tamina for presenting her research paper titled Developing Cross-Cultural Values, an Immersive Experience in Jeju at the 8th Philippine Korean Studies Symposium organized by the University of the Philippines Korea Research Center and the Department of Linguistics at the University of the Philippines Diliman, given on 21st January 2023, signed by Dr. Kyungmin Bay and Dr. Cristina Gallego. Maraming salamat sa inyong dalawa. And for those who have sent in their questions, thank you very much for the comments and the questions. And for those who we haven't addressed, we'll try to address them through the comments section. Maraming salamat, James and Julian. Okay, now on to the next part of the program. Let us continue with the next session. In this session, we will meet researchers who have been working with UPKRC in 2022 on various topics. Very busy talaga yung UPKRC. They have the overarching theme, Korean public diplomacy in the time of pandemic, focusing on Korea-Philippines bilateral relations. Today, And next Saturday, there will be four research teams who will present their findings. So we'll have two presentations for today. The first one is about advancing public diplomacy amid digitalization, comparing social media communication patterns of select Philippine and South Korean agencies. This research topic will be presented by three speakers. First is Mr. Jovito Katigbak. He is a faculty member of the International Studies Department of Far Eastern University in Manila, Philippines. He has published articles on international relations, diplomacy, and development. Jovito was the Philippine representative to the G20 Global Leadership Program 2019 and to the East Asian Diplomacy Program 2022, which were both held in South Korea. He has an MA degree in development policy from the De La Salle University and an AB in consular and diplomatic affairs, magna cum laude from De La Salle College of St. Benil. Jovito is also a researcher at the Foreign Service Institute. Okay. Um, with him is Seksan Anantasirikyat. Is currently a researcher at the International Studies Center, Thailand, and advertising director, Korean Association of Thai Studies. His research interests include public diplomacy in Asia, national security, strategy of middle powers, political security issues on the Korean Peninsula, and Asian community building. He writes extensively for the CPD blog of USC Center on Public Diplomacy and the Geopolitics. His recent commentaries and book chapters cover Thai perspectives on South Korea's strategy towards ASEAN as well as soft power. Okay. And the third member of the group is Mr. Michael Manahan, who is an instructor at the Department of Linguistics in University of the Philippines, Diliman. He is currently an MA anthropology student at the UPD Department of Anthropology and is currently writing his thesis on the analysis of Filipino emotion terms using the natural semantic meta language. Um, his obsession tama ba 'to? His obsession at the moment is doing subtitling work for the Big N streaming service. So if you finish a kuan 'no, if you finish a series and there's a Tagalog subtitles, check until the end, you might see his name. Okay. So are we ready? Jovito, Sexan, and Michael? Okay. So the screen is yours.
Hello, good afternoon. Can you hear me? Okay, thank you very much, Maria, for the introduction. And before we proceed with the presentation proper, let me acknowledge the presence of my co-presenters who are with me today. Mr. Sexan from Thailand, who was properly introduced, as well as Michael or Miko, who is from the UP Department of Linguistics, if I'm not mistaken. As mentioned, all three of us will be delivering important portions of our research paper, and let us inform you beforehand that the findings that you will see are preliminary because we're still in the process of sifting through so much data that we gathered, and you will hear more about that later. And without further ado, let me ask UPKRC to share our slides. No? Thank you very much once again to UPKRC for holding this forum. We hope to hear from everyone who are watching at home uh, about your questions and comments or possibly insights on the topic at hand. While we're setting up, while we're trying to pull up our slides, let me also call on Sexan or Miko to say hello to the audience at home.
Right. Thank you very much, Sir Jovito. I'd like to express my appreciation to the UP Korea Research Center for your kind invitation to ask me to join this project. It's my great honor to work with great researchers like Sir Jovito and Sir Mike. And I learned a lot from them. And thank you, everyone, for um, being with us today. Right.
Hello, everyone. Thank you to UPKRC for holding this symposium and for funding our project for this year.
Okay, thank you very much, Miko and Sexan. And now let us proceed with the presentation proper. Are the slides, uh, can the slides be viewed in your screens, or I don't see it in mine? But let me just proceed. No, as mentioned by our moderator for our session, the title of our presentation is "Advancing Public Diplomacy Amid Digitalization: Comparing Social Media Communication Patterns of Select Philippine and South Korean Agencies." And the period covered by our data gathered is from 2016 to 2022, which were uh, which uh, under respectively under the Duterte administration and the Moon Jae-in administration. This is the outline of our presentation. We're only given 40 minutes to deliver everything that's on here, but we'll not spend too much time on each of the portions of our presentation. Just the important parts. Okay. So let us proceed with the first part, which is setting the context. Next slide, please. I think it's very important for us to understand key concepts when we talk of public diplomacy, digital diplomacy, cultural diplomacy, propaganda, right? Are they all the same? Can we use the terms interchangeably? Many have made the mistake unknowingly of using public diplomacy and cultural diplomacy synonymously, but they're not the same. They're very different, as well as cultural diplomacy. Digital diplomacy is also different from e-diplomacy. You see, there are many important nuances that we have to establish, recognize, and one of the objectives of our presentation is to basically give you a better understanding of what is public diplomacy and digital diplomacy in the context of the Philippines and South Korea. So next slide, please. So, what is public diplomacy? Public diplomacy has many meanings. There's actually no universally agreed definition, but there's a definition that is usually referred to by many of the experts and practitioners. And this one is provided by Dean Gullion of Tufts University, Fletcher School. And he mentioned that when we talk of public diplomacy, it basically deals with the influence of public attitudes on the formation and execution of foreign policies. It encompasses a lot, specifically international relations beyond traditional diplomacy, the cultivation by governments of public opinion in other countries, the interaction of private groups and interests in one country with those of another, the reporting of foreign affairs and its impact on policy, communication between those whose job is communication, as between diplomats and correspondents, and the processes of intercultural communications. The use of the term public diplomacy did not emerge only in the 1960s. Even during World War I, World War II, public diplomacy was already coined, but it was used in a different context. Public diplomacy was used as opposed to private diplomacy. So when they refer to public diplomacy, they refer to as open diplomacy, the practice of diplomacy that is accessible to the majority or to the public. But when we take the word public diplomacy in the 1960s, it is very different, especially in the context of the Cold War. And so public diplomacy has undergone several permutations. Its definition, its context has also changed, specifically during 2001 during the 9/11, wherein the US has aggressively incorporated public diplomacy in its initiatives and their own forward. And from that point, okay, several countries have taken notice and used public diplomacy to advance several foreign policy objectives. Traditionally, public diplomacy can be viewed or is advanced through three important mechanisms: print, no? Newspapers, radio, and television. So as flash on your screen, these were the primary tools to advance public diplomacy in the traditional setting. Next slide, please. But as I mentioned, because of the changes that we have seen and are seeing, one of the very transformational development in the dynamic environment that we are in, and in the specifically the international community that it is in, the rise of information and communication technologies has prompted many government agencies, specifically foreign ministries, to alter how they practice diplomacy and how they interact with their target audiences. Okay? The use of digital platforms and technologies has also transformed, has also altered, has also modified how the different non-state actors participate in the diplomatic processes. From traditional setting, we're now seeing the new public diplomacy. And new public diplomacy can be aptly characterized uh, by the presence of non-state actors, okay, and the volume of the participants in the diplomatic processes. It's not only about government to government, you also have government to non-state actors. More importantly, the nature of the discussions, right? The type of objectives being met by public diplomacy has also expanded. And that's the objective of that's another objective of our research. So basically highlight how has Philippine and South Korean agencies use social media sites or platforms to advance certain public diplomacy initiatives. Okay, next slide, please. The slide that is flashed on your screen basically shows what are the differences in terms of the old traditional public diplomacy and the new public diplomacy. As you can see here, one of the major differences is the flow of information. Okay? In the traditional PD or public diplomacy, information flows from the sender to the receiver, monologic, and that's about it. There's no feedback mechanism. It's not dialogic as opposed to new PD. And why? Because several platforms, several mechanisms can now be accessible to the different non-state actors. It is low cost, it is very convenient, and it is accessible to almost everyone as long as you have an internet connection and an online account. Okay, next slide, please. Now, what are the components, okay, of digital diplomacy? And again, it's important to note what is digital diplomacy? Digital diplomacy is basically the use of web, ICTs, okay, in advancing foreign policy objectives. Okay? It's also vital to underscore that when we think of digital diplomacy, it does not focus on public diplomacy. Instead, digital diplomacy encompasses public diplomacy. So DD or digital diplomacy is not the same as PD. It's much more encompassing because it basically talks about the use of web ICT by the foreign ministries in its operations. No, the incorporation of digital tools as opposed to PD, which focuses on the use of or basically the sharing of ideas, okay, sharing of information to influence or to shape how the foreign publics perceive, no, a country or a country's initiative. Okay? Components of digital diplomacy, as I mentioned, one of which is only public diplomacy and nation branding. Second is organizing information for diplomatic constituents, basically information dissemination. And lastly, information gathering or foreign ministries soliciting information from the end users. Next slide, please. Okay. With the rise of ICT and digitalization, we also see one important platform that has actually threaded so many lines, so many boundaries, so much so that it has blurred uh, diplomacy in its sense. I may dare say, no, it has basically fused so many disciplines, so many actors, so many issues. No, the use of social media. You've heard of Facebook diplomacy, right? Diplomacy, as represented there by Donald Trump, for better or for worse. No? The use of Instagram by different leaders, and even YouTube, okay? To share culture, to share vital information. And as we see the rise of social media, foreign ministries have actually adopted, no, this these social media platforms. The question now is, are they effective in adopting social media platforms? What are the challenges? And are they successful in attaining their foreign policy objectives? Because at the end of the day, it's their mandate. Okay? Next slide, please. Okay? One of the major, uh, one of the countries that is being cited for its dynamic and proactive use of public diplomacy in the digital age is none other than South Korea. Okay? For many of you, Hallyu, Korean Wave, okay, is at the top of your mind. Okay? But if you look closely into the public diplomacy initiative of South Korea, it doesn't focus mainly on culture. When the operative term there is I'm sorry, solely, it doesn't solely focus on culture. No? It also talks about the public diplomacy efforts of South Korea, talks about politics, economics, and very important security issues. Okay? Nevertheless, what's noticeable about the public diplomacy effort of South Korea is that they have accumulated all of their efforts, no, and they have institutionalized initiatives related to public diplomacy through Korea Z, no, or Korea Z. Okay? They're also very active in trying to engage citizens, both domestically and internationally, through various efforts. Okay? Now, Korea can also be cited for its citizen diplomacy initiatives, which somehow can be related to or linked with public diplomacy. And I'll discuss more on that later. Next slide, please. One of the countries who's trying to follow the footsteps of Korea and who's desperately in need of a recalibration of diplomacy, public diplomacy efforts is none other than the Philippines. Okay, I have several slides here on the social media profile of the Philippines, which was taken from the digital report in 2017. I'm sorry, in 2022. But I think we're using a PDF here. So let me just go straight to the point. The point is the Philippines has so much potential in terms of using social media because of its users, because of the number of Filipinos overseas. Eh? But the question is, can we effectively tap them and reach them, no, in terms of our public diplomacy initiatives? Aside from the Filipino audience, also the foreign public. What are the contents of our public diplomacy initiatives? No? Can we measure the success or the progress? These are very important questions. And as I mentioned, because of the many Filipino diaspora, no, in different parts of the world, this has actually become one of the major focuses of Philippine uh, foreign service posts outside, no, or embassies, mainly protection of the rights and welfare of Filipinos overseas. And so, under the Duterte administration, he has emphasized, especially during the pandemic, that the main priority is none other than the Filipino overseas in different parts of the world. And I think we are now ready to proceed to the next part, which is the research problem objectives. All of this context, no, with all of this said, the main question that we're trying to address here is, next slide, please. How do Philippine and South Korean government agencies utilize social networking sites in this case, no, in this time, at this point in time, mainly Facebook, in advancing the respective public diplomacy objectives? So in essence, what we're trying to do here is basically contribute to the academic discourse on public diplomacy and digital diplomacy, describe the digital diplomacy initiatives of the Philippine and South Korean governments, characterize and compare social media communication patterns by both Philippine and South Korean embassies, and lastly, of course, outline policy options and considerations in advancing Philippine-South Korea bilateral relations, even, specifically focusing on public diplomacy. So I think I can now turn over the floor to Sexan to deliver his part on the review of related literature. Sexan, the floor is yours.
Right. Thank you very much, Sir Jovito. I think you have made it clear that digital diplomacy is potential but novel area that we should explore more possibilities to study. And you have already mentioned the key concept of our paper that is about the evaluation of digital diplomacy. Next slide, please. Right. Yeah. So I will touch upon the review of related literature, but I will not spend more time on this because I would like to focus more on the presentation of the results by Sir Mike and also Sir Jovito. As I said before, I think digital diplomacy is a very important issue in the international relations in the 21st century, and this is how we treat this as a digitalization of public diplomacy. So that's why we focus more on how the governments, the two governments in the Philippines and South Korea, how they employ the tools, digital tools, to achieve foreign policy goals. As we see that this is a big gap of the study about digital diplomacy because most scholarships focus more on how they employ that kind of tools and focus more specifically on Facebook, Twitter, or any specific platform. But we want to focus more bigger than that. We want to see the overview on how the previous governments of the two countries employ these tools to achieve the foreign policy goals. So how we position our works in the study of digital diplomacy. I start with the study of Barnett et al., arguing that it is possible to measure international relations by analyzing social media posts or conversations taking place on the social media platforms by the government. Several scholarly works applies relational concept, so it's more two-way. And I think this is clear that public diplomacy is not propaganda because we focus more on two-way. So it's about both sender and receiver. It's not just about sender talking about themselves. So there are many cases that focus more on the Western cases. But I think this is another strong point of this work because we try to reorient the interest of digital diplomacy from just great powers or Western powers to ASEAN countries and to Asian countries. I think this is important. Next slide, please. Yeah, as you can see from this, there are several works studying about utilization of diplomatic missions, Facebook as a tool for communication and engagement, also the investigation of the role of citizen diplomacy in formulating political messages to legitimize specific cases such as Israel and legitimize its rival during the military operations in Gaza. DD is also employed for security-related concerns, as you can see from the case of Barry, that talk about U.S. Ambassador Robert Ford extensively utilized Facebook to bypass the Syrian government's heavy censorship. DD has been also very effective in humanitarian aid and the crisis management of natural disasters. I think this is clear in the case of Haiti and Japan. So next slide, please. Right. And about digital diplomacy in East Asia, I think we have a lot of space for this study. And I think this work set kind of groundwork for further research about this because there are several cases talk about China, India, due to the nationality of researcher itself themselves. For example, Muhammad Itefaq compares governmental usage of Facebook and Twitter by the Indian and Pakistani government. And result found that India has more institutionalized approach towards digital engagement than Pakistan. So this work is very important to prove, and they also have policy implications. I think this is another point of another useful point of our work. Also, Itefaq, again, he's very active researcher in this area, digital diplomacy. He also explores German ambassador to Pakistan's Twitter usage and arguing that high-level diplomats' Twitter messages could influence the offline diplomatic practice. Next slide, please. Right, but when it comes to Southeast Asia, I think this is important, where research has looked at the issues of soft power and public diplomacy. So there is a big gap that this work can fulfill. While other ASEAN member states such as Singapore, Malaysia, and the Philippines have used digital diplomacy to promote public diplomacy, disseminate information, and solicit feedback from target audiences. A work by Pakovsky in 2015 examined the case of ASEAN vis-a-vis NATO and EU, but this work still focus more at the regional level. So I think it's important to focus more at the national level and focus more on the effective implementation of the policy through the whole government. Next slide, please. Right. I think it's clear here, without any mentioning rising star, South Korea has been one of the most famous case study in the study of both public diplomacy and digital diplomacy. Although the country has been dubbed as a latecomer, it has been well organized in institutionalizing public diplomacy. I still remember when I was in Korea back in 2016, 2018. At that time, there was the enactment of public diplomacy law, or Gongong Wegyobo, for the first time in the country, in order to build kind of continuity of policy implementation. That was during the Park Geun-hye government. Later, the government adopted the first basic plan on public diplomacy, or 제1차 대한민국 공공외교 기본 계획. So the current one is the second one, and I think they focus more on metaverse, which should be the future focus. But I think this part we try to bring you to kind of the different area that people did not focus much, such as digital diplomacy. Because when I kind of review literature, most of the works, they talk a lot about K-pop and about kind of K-content. But I think this is still lag behind on this area. So next slide, please. Right, so some of the previous works focus more and provide very important insights about comparison of the Korean and Japanese institution on public diplomacy, such as Park et al., that reaffirms the claim that South Korea is more successful than Japan in terms of international network building and narrating the country's stories through a small world connectivity perspective. So they use a kind of different tools to study this, such as a kind of the study of the words, keywords, or kind of institutional building, how speakers, how the Korean government supports kind of international influencers or speakers to talk more, to disseminate more about the case of Korea. While the case of Montera in 2020 points out a similar argument by highlighting Korea's success in spreading cultural attraction through social media platforms in the forms of K-pop and K-content. Again, still only K-pop and K-content. Next slide, please. I think it's important to learn about the Philippine experience. I would say that the Philippines is a giant in digital diplomacy in our region, in our ASEAN region. Some other countries, maybe Indonesia, Thailand, and let's say Singapore. At the DFA, Department of Foreign Affairs, public diplomacy is understood as application of management, very important keyword, representation, communication, and negotiation skills. So I would say that the DFA has already taken the two-way approach in its practice of digital diplomacy. The move to adopt social media by the department itself is grounded on the former's positive characteristics. I think we share this similar characteristic in ASEAN region: low cost, convenient, instantaneous, audience specific, and permits unfiltered access to audiences. The work of Hernandez and Atienza are kind of very insightful and very useful for being a kind of groundwork for the future studies. They stress that the DFA utilized initially both social media accounts in a monologic transmission media manner to reflect its outputs, but gradually moved towards production of original content. So this is the key. Original content, specifically its Twitter account. So that's why we try to focus more on several platforms or tools to see the whole of government approach on how a specific government use the kind of whole platforms to achieve the foreign policy goals. Next slide, please. Yeah, and I think this is important. Foreign service posts follow the footsteps of first movers and users in the use of social media for two purposes. First is to maintain direct communication with the Filipino community and foreign audience for consular and advisors. And second is to promote cultural diplomacy. I think we share this kind of characteristic in ASEAN region. because we focus more on these two purposes. And I think this work can help us understand more, even the ASEAN style of these experiences by exploring through the case of the Philippines. For example, the case of Philippine Embassy in Tokyo utilized the official site and Facebook page to provide evacuation-related instructions to Filipinos during the Fukushima nuclear accident. Also, the Philippine Embassy in London put social media into smart use by disseminating and publishing its Facebook page on the regular situation to update and to inform the people. So I think it's important that we should learn. Filipino migrants that marry and living with their Korean families in rural areas have likewise benefited from information dissemination by the Philippine Embassy in Seoul. So I would say that if I want to conclude here, there are three key important of this work. First, we focus more on the whole of government approach. I think this is very new, very new. Second, we try to highlight more on non-Western cases. So this is another key, another usefulness of this work. And third, we focus more on the kind of the usage of different platforms in order to achieve foreign policy goals. I think this is a missing link when we talk about digital diplomacy. So I would pass this to the next part, to Sir Mike methodology. So the floor is yours, Sir Mike.
Okay, thank you, Sir Saxan. Now, for the data and methods part of the study, now to achieve the goals of the research, I will briefly discuss the methods that we utilize and the quality of data that we have gathered and provide proposal or directions for the study. This is a comparative case study wherein we seek to analyze the similarities, differences, and patterns of two foreign ministries and their associated agencies in South Korea and the Philippines in the digital realm, particularly in their use of social media platforms. To enumerate, these platforms are Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. Initially, we wanted to study the following official pages and accounts. For South Korea, they are the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, Embassy of the Republic of Korea in the Philippines, and the Korean Cultural Center in the Philippines, which is the cultural arm of the embassy. And then for the Philippines, their counterpart institutions and agencies such as the Department of Foreign Affairs, Philippine Embassy in Korea, National Commission for Culture and the Arts, or NCCA, with particular focus on Centro Rizal. Um, for this study, a total of 13,077 posts from these accounts were collected by a team of researchers for the period July 2016 to June 2022, which is the Duterte administration. However, due to time and resource restrictions, we were only able to finish the two social media accounts in Facebook of the Embassy of the Republic of Korea in the Philippines and the Philippine Embassy in Korea. So 768 posts during that period from July 2016 to June 2020. There's a total number of posts from the Korean Embassy, and from the Philippine Embassy, it's 1,389 posts. For this iteration of the study, we decided to focus on those with complete data sets, which are those identified foreign ministries. And currently, we're still on the process of completing the around 8,000 posts, currently 7,593 posts from the Department of Foreign Affairs. On the data gathering aspect from these institutions' accounts, aside from the posts, we also recorded the number of reactions and shares for each post in order to perhaps include this in providing a commentary on the social media engagements of each institution on Facebook. Metadata such as theme or content of the posts were also included and tagged individually. For embassy, the data collected in this research will provide information and commentaries. Will provide commentaries on questions such as the function of the social networking sites, particularly Facebook in these institutions. Like, for instance, based on the themes discussed or the themes identified, what major or most common topics are posted or were shared in these platforms. And then the data also hopes to provide insights on the strength of the institution's platform on these sites? Like, for instance, based on the date of publication and or social climate, are the topics consistent or are they specific to a particular period or time event only? And then the data also provide us with information regarding programs and responses to not only local but also international events. For example, comparing before, during, and after specific events like COVID health issues, policy changes, were these changes in the themes published by the SNS platforms. And finally, the data will hopefully give the intended audience the institutional image that these agencies want to embody. For example, based on SNS post for its target audience, how would one categorize the two embassy Facebook platforms based on the type of information they publish? So some possible classifications for this may include extension of services offered by their home unit, such as the Department of Foreign Affairs for the Philippines and Ministry of Foreign Affairs for South Korea, which this categorization can then be considered as client oriented. And then we also have a proposed category like public relations platform to modify their own image of the institution, which may be considered as a bit self-oriented, meaning it provides benefits to the concerned agency. And then we also have the mixed type of category, for example, a variety uh, of services offered by the institution, such as in-house services and in-house special events, news updates, and informational materials. So these categorizations may fall further under Lewis's 8 policy goals for digital diplomacy, which we hope to utilize in the research. So these policy goals are knowledge management, public diplomacy, information management, consular communications and response, disaster response, internet freedom, external resources, and policy planning. Now, I am giving the floor back to you, Vito, for the preliminary findings and analysis.
Thank you very much, Miko. Can we pull up the other part there? Thank you very much. Next slide, please, and let us proceed with the preliminary findings and analysis. Next slide, please. Next slide. Uh, Next, please. Next. Okay, there. In terms of the findings and analysis, again, let me just reiterate that these are very preliminary because we are not yet done in terms of going over the data in the different platforms because we have to basically look at every post, okay, and code them and tag them, okay. So it's essentially would take maybe the end of the month or maybe early February, maybe by next month to finish everything. So what we're going to do now is present to you the preliminary findings and of course open the floor for questions or comments. Okay. But before we proceed with the actual data from the Facebook pages of both the Philippine Embassy in Seoul and the Korean Embassy in the Philippines, let us just first again remind or reiterate the importance of context setting. Okay, and let us proceed with ROK. In terms of ROK, advancing public diplomacy amid digitalization can be observed in terms of its institutionalization processes. Okay, and these are, as mentioned by earlier by Sexan, as supported by the RL, these were exhibited by number one, establishment or appointment of an ambassador for public diplomacy since 2011, the enactment of public diplomacy law in 2016, the new Southern policy of President Moon Jae-in, which talks about maintaining, achieving peace and prosperity in the Southeast Asian region through use of culture, and then the culture social cultural relations and collaboration. Okay, another important signal that South Korea is serious about its public diplomacy efforts is the Basic Plan on Public Diplomacy from 2017 to 2021, and of course the office that is in charge of public diplomacy efforts, which is the Digital Public Diplomacy Division under the Public Diplomacy and Cultural Affairs Bureau of the MOFA. As I mentioned earlier, the Ministry of Foreign Affairs of Korea has also centralized all of its public diplomacy related efforts through the Korea Z platform. No, if you go to the website to its website to YouTube, you can see a lot of materials there that encompass a number of uh, things. Okay, it may be for info about the efforts of the country on certain initiatives, for example, human rights. Okay, it may also be about Korean culture, Korean arts, Hallyu, Korean wave. So the key point here is that it is noticeable that the direction of the public diplomacy of South Korea is top down. No, it comes from the executive, and it is coursed through the Korea Z program, okay, or the Korea Z platform. Sorry, in terms of its reach outside, okay, MOFA has partnered with 184 foreign embassies, and it acts as an outpost for region-specific PD projects. What's also vital to underscore here is that the public diplomacy efforts by the Ministry of Foreign Affairs of South Korea are now linked with the concept of participatory diplomacy or citizen diplomacy. How? Through the public diplomacy project of Korean citizens, wherein each citizen is given the opportunity and resources to become an ambassador for public diplomacy. And I think this has important lessons. This bring important lessons to a country like the Philippines because we have so many Filipinos outside, and we've been tinkering with the idea that Filipinos overseas can be used as ambassadors, okay? Ambassadors of the Philippines. And how can we effectively do that? Possibly through public diplomacy. Okay? Next slide, please. Now, to show you the division as well as the goals and the strategy of South Korea, uh, this is accessible online. And what it goes to show is that they have an overarching strategy. They have an overarching vision as well as specific strategies relating to public diplomacy. Okay? Only relating to public diplomacy. Of course, digital diplomacy, as I mentioned, is much more encompassing in terms of the foreign ministry, but it is understandable that public diplomacy now can be advanced through digital platforms. No? And I won't go over this because I think Sexan as has already emphasized the digital diplomacy and public diplomacy efforts by South Korea. Next slide, please. Now, I'll turn over the floor again to Miko to share the results of the data gathering, no, the findings. Go ahead, Miko.
Okay.
No, no. Let's stick with the current. Sorry. Or
Yes.
are you going to use your?
Okay, I'll just use that slide. Okay, so this is from the Embassy of the Republic of Korea in the Philippines posts. There were a total of 768 posts made in the identified period of 6 years and 2,768 tokens. But please note that the use of the term token here is modified into word or phrasal tokens, which were gleaned from the thematic coding of the post. So having this modification, in a way, medyo nalinis or partially cleaned yung data. And these linguistic expressions were then fed into a word cloud generator and yielded this following image. So the word clouds, we use this method to show yung metadata for easier understanding and to get an overview of what the data is about or what it represents, as well as their potential usefulness in this research. The clouds display text where the size of a word or phrase represents its frequency. So the bigger or bolder the text, the more frequent it appears in the data. So the three most frequently used themes for Embassy of the Republic of Korea in the Philippines are COVID-19, public advisory, and Korea. But we can also note this. These are in terms of the number of frequency. But you can also notice in this image other themes such as holiday, job opening, and anniversary. And then for the next slide, please. For the Philippine Embassy in Korea, uh, next slide, sorry. Okay, so for the Philippine Embassy in Korea, there were a total of 1,389 posts, again, made in the identified period of 6 years, and 2,869 tokens were gathered in terms of themes and content expressions. So the three most frequently used codes were advisory, COVID-19, and event. But you can also notice other themes such as culture, Philippine elections, and celebration. So by utilizing this word cloud generator, we can at least have an overview of what the common themes or topics are present in this social media platforms of the two embassies that we studied. Yeah, Vito.
These two slides earlier. Sorry, just again, just to set the context in the Philippines case. Thank you very much, Miko. When we look at the Philippines case in terms of public diplomacy amid the digitalization process, it is inherent that reaching the Filipino public, it's inherent that the Philippine embassies, in different parts of the world, or the foreign service posts, must reach out to uh, Filipino overseas. Why? Because as mentioned in the country's foreign policy pillars, Pillar 3 focuses on the protection of the welfare and interests of Filipino overseas. And this was emphasized specifically under the Duterte administration. No? More specifically, during the COVID-19 pandemic, when so many Filipinos were outside, and so the Foreign Service Post has to use digital platforms, online tools in order to reach Filipino communities because of restrictions. Okay? For its part, the ministry or the Department of Foreign Affairs have actually identified public diplomacy as one of its priorities in its strat plan from 2017 to 2022. The office in charge of advancing public diplomacy is the Office of Public and Cultural Diplomacy, which was a change from the Public Information Services Unit. No? And this is with the understanding that the Philippine government, through its DFA, must have an agency or an office that is in charge of public diplomacy. Even until now, there's still debates in terms of who should be in charge of public diplomacy and nation branding. No, I have to admit it. There's still debates as to uh, who should, take the lead. But at the end of the day, when you think of public diplomacy, the DFA should take the lead because we're talking here of reaching out to foreign communities, to foreign public. Nevertheless, we're not discarding the role of different Philippine agencies. Okay? Despite its efforts, majority of the engagement from the online users focus on consular-related concerns. No? If you go to the Facebook page of the DFA as well as the Instagram account, and the different Facebook pages of our embassies, you can see that it's not only about advisories. There's a concerted, at least a concerted effort to highlight Filipino culture, the achievements of Filipinos outside of outside of the country, right? Nevertheless, when I did my thesis actually in 2019, the OPCD, the Office of Public Cultural Diplomacy of the DFA, mentioned that majority of the engagements that they get, the questions, the comments that they receive, focus on consular-related concerns, meaning visa, uh, assistance to nationals, which presents a disconnect. Because if you're trying to advance public diplomacy, but the engagement that you get are consular-related, then that means, okay, a recalibration of or change even a minor change in strategy might be considered. Okay, but let me stop at that and proceed to the third point. The DFA has undertaken social media adoption in the DFA has taken social media adoption as early as 2011, 2012, no? But it has no department-wide strategy for social networking sites. It has a guide. It has released a document containing guidelines for engaging through social media sites, no? But the department doesn't have an agency-wide strategy. Okay. Other challenges relating to social media adoption relate to resources, skills of personnel, and veracity of information received. Can we proceed to the next slide? Next slide, please. Now, to summarize, no, the preliminary data that we have, we created a table to show the similarities and differences in terms of the digital diplomacy attributes of both the Philippines and South Korea. And this is, this looks at the DFA MOFA as well as the Philippine Embassy in Seoul and the Korean Embassy in the Philippines. If you look at the national strategy, as I mentioned, it is inherent that the Philippine government and foreign service posts must advance public diplomacy because it's considered as one of the pillars of the country's foreign policy. It also has the DFA strat plan, while on the other hand, no, in the Moon Jae-in administration, they have the new Southern Diplomacy, the Public Diplomacy Law 2016, and the Basic Plan on Public Diplomacy. Concerned agencies for the Philippines, the OPCD, headed by an assistant secretary, while for South Korea, it's the Ambassador for Public Diplomacy, as well as the Digital Public Diplomacy Division, who is also in charge of the Korea Z platform. In terms of the digital diplomacy components, no, the digital diplomacy used or the Facebook pages used by both the embassies in Seoul and in Manila uh, encompass three components, no, or three types: public diplomacy and nation branding, information dissemination, especially advisories, okay, and solicitation of information or gathering of feedback or important information, for example, related to COVID-19. Major topics in social networking sites, specifically in Facebook. For the Philippines, it's advisory, COVID-19, and events. For South Korea, again, it's COVID-19, Korea and public all about Korea and public advisory. And this is understandable because from 2020 to 2022, the world was stricken by the pandemic. So majority of the posts and the comments relate to COVID-19 advisory, rules, and regulations in their host countries. In terms of the strength of institution platform mission, we dare say that it is strong for both agencies. Why? Because posts, we went through the post one by one and they reflect consistent fulfillment of mandates, meaning they disseminate information, okay, relative to important issues, events, and developments locally and globally, as well as related to public diplomacy from 2016 to 2022. And they have they're very adaptive, no, they're very flexible because when pandemic came, majority of the posts focused on COVID-19 related info and news. This is both the same for Philippines and South Korean Facebook pages. In terms of the nature of responses to both local and international events, we characterize it as instantaneous because the date uh, is very close to the announcement of a very important event, almost instantaneous. And the content also change according to the dominant local or global development. For example, in the Philippines, COVID-19, or in South Korea, COVID-19, no, as well as Philippine national elections. In South Korea, COVID-19 and other related events, no. But it's also interesting to note that when we looked at the data, public diplomacy and cultural diplomacy is still very prevalent in the page of South Korea, okay, as opposed to the Philippines. Institutional image, how was Facebook used by both embassies? Mixed. No, it's a combination of citizen-oriented, image-oriented, and self-oriented. So a lot of contents or many of the contents featured different types of objectives. Okay, so I think we can now proceed to since we're running late, we can now proceed to the conclusion. Next slide, please. Okay, very important points. Number one, the ubiquity of social media, meaning social media being everywhere, prompts foreign ministries and government agencies to incorporate it in its strategy and its initiatives. Okay, but as we do this, we must also consider two important things. Number one, the volume. the number of people involved, and the type of participants. We're not only dealing with governments, we're also dealing with non-state actors, no? Businesses, citizens, international governmental organizations, NGOs, and all of them participate in the diplomatic process. Second, context matters. No? The posts of the Philippine Embassy in Seoul is mainly focused on COVID-19 advisory because we have a large Filipino contingency, not only in Seoul, but also everywhere. As compared to South Korea, which focuses on culture and peace diplomacy because of its situation. Okay? And third is, despite their conceptual differences, we've seen similarities in terms of how they use Facebook, uh, mainly for public diplomacy and nation branding, information dissemination, and information solicitation. So while we see the benefits and the gains to be reaped from using digital platforms and applying digital diplomacy, you know, uh, to achieve public diplomacy objectives, we must also be aware of the risks and threats associated with this type of platforms. Number one is cybersecurity, no, veracity of information, and more importantly, you know, fake news. Fake news is very prevalent now, and it it doesn't discriminate. Everyone can be a victim of fake news or disinformation. So I think it's very important for foreign ministries to wisely, no, and carefully use digital platforms. And so with all of this, let us proceed to the policy options and considerations. Next slide, please. Okay, for both the Philippine government and South Korean government, we've only identified four. Number one, okay, we must for both countries they may consider fostering stronger digital diplomacy-oriented institutions. Yes, there are foundations, no? There are offices, there are policies in place, but if you look at data, if you look at reports of related to public diplomacy in South Korea, and according to the interview that I did with the Department of Foreign Affairs, there's actually lesser budget for social networking sites utilization. And yes, we may say it's because it's low cost, okay? But there's 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 expected cost in terms of transitioning. Okay? And when we say budget, we talk of resources. We talk of uh, ICT, speed, infrastructure, human resources, the skills needed by personnel in using digital platforms. Okay? What else? They may also consider a specific strategy for SNS adoption, and this is specific to the Philippines. Okay? But there are certain issues that must be uh, addressed. For example, is a department-wide social media strategy uh, applicable, or should it be foreign service post specific because of the different context? I think these are very important issues that must be addressed. Now, second, exploration of joint digital diplomacy projects, and I think this is important because if you want to promote Hallyu as well as P-pop, perhaps joint digital diplomacy projects may be undertaken by both Philippines and South Korea. Third, again, this focuses on the Philippines' greater citizen participation. We must remember that social networking sites may be used as a mobilization platform and feedback mechanism to listen to our constituents, to perform better, and to craft a more targeted public diplomacy strategy. And last, in order for us to identify where we're at and if we are really effective in or efficient in achieving our objectives, it is important to come up with metrics to measure whether there is progress or success. And so with that, I'll end our presentation. I think we're 5 minutes past the time that is allotted to us, but thank you very much. Maraming salamat. Kamsahamnida. No? And we look forward to your questions and comments. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Vito, Sexan, and Miko. That is some data wealthy research. No, I hope you guys are not yet drowning with the analysis. And also the introductory part was very detailed and very helpful for those like me who are not experts of this field. So we are looking forward to the questions that we will be asking later. We have gathered some. For those who want to ask questions, please feel free to post your questions or comments, and we will address them during the open forum. No? Okay. Next, we have our next presentation. The next presentation is titled "You're Cool Pala: Politicized Filipino K-pop Fan Culture and Fandom Identity Construction." And this will be presented by Hasmin Sabrina Rombawa and Kyungmin Bay. Okay, let me introduce our speakers. Um, tama kaya yung Hasmin? Jasmine, I'm sorry. Miss Rombawa or Jazz is an instructor of communication research in the Department of Communication of Ateneo de Manila University. She graduated BA Communication Arts, major in writing, uh, in UP Los Baños, and MA Education major in language education in UP Diliman's College of Education. She is currently working on her PhD in education, major in language education in the College of in the UP College of Education, and she is interested in Korean language, Korean media culture, education technology, and the intersections of communication and education. She will be presenting with Dr. Kyungmin Bae, who is currently serving as an OIC director of UP Korea Research Center and also teaching Korean language as an assistant professorial fellow at the UP Department of Linguistics. She obtained her PhD in language education at UP College of Education in 2020, and she is passionate about training future generations of the Filipino KFL teachers and also translating Korean literature to English. Jazz and Mia, are we ready? Okay, sige, the screen is yours.
Thank you, Ria. Just and I will divide into different slides so we can share how we can present our preliminary findings. As you see in the slide, the title of our presentation is "You Are Cool Pala: Politicized Filipino K-pop Fan Culture and Fandom Identity Construction," because we came up with this topic at the height of the 2022 presidential election campaign in the Philippines, as we witnessed so many changes in the election campaigns, especially the involvement and behaviors of Filipino voters. Amongst them was a group of Filipinos, particularly the rather younger groups, who are leading festive mood of political campaigns and rallies in different cities and provinces. And what was front and behind of them was K-pop. So we saw this phenomenon totally new in the Philippines, and we wished to look at this phenomenon, why and what was really happening in the field. So, if I share a brief abstract of our study, we tried to look into Filipino K-pop fandom's political involvement during the presidential election campaign and their behaviors, in particular, how their fan culture was really displayed and even transformed and infused into expressing their political orientations in order to examine the phenomenon. So, next slide, please. So in this next slide, we also listed down some keywords of our study, such as K-pop, fandom, fan culture, and fan activism, and digital intimacy, and lastly, community of practice. Like Vito's team, our study is also sharing preliminary findings. So if you share any questions or comments, it will greatly help us complete this study. Next slide, please. Before we go into deeper part, we can discuss some background how Korean wave or Hallyu really emerged or evolved and now continuing its impact in and outside Korean peninsula. Like I wrote here, popularity of K-pop in the global arena since 1990s and 2000s and then 2010, because this also describes how Hallyu really emerged from Hallyu 1.0, 2.0, and currently 3.0. In Hallyu 3.0, we can focus on new media, especially all those social media networks and then OTT platforms like the background image of these all Korean dramas on Netflix. And then also it's linked to proactive culture product consumption by domestic and international fans. So if we fast forward to the 2020s, after almost 2 decades, Hallyu is now visible in more continents beyond geographical proximity, because initially Hallyu was rather popular in Asian regions. For instance, BTS received their first Grammy Award nomination for Dynamite in 2020, and then followed by Bota in 2021, and then three nominations also followed in 2023. So at the same time, London's Victoria and Albert Museum also hosted the exhibition titled Hallyu, the Korean Wave. So if we go back about 20 or 30 years ago, it's almost unimaginable how Korean culture is consumed outside Korea. Next slide, please. So here, I think quite a lot of you remember how Psy's Gangnam Style music video really had a global hit in 2012, especially its sensation in North American regions and Europe as well. And I think it was one of the turning points that Hallyu was really able to break through once again beyond geographical proximity. In addition, if you see the graphs in the right side, K-pop fandoms participatory practices also evidently evolved, especially in time of advanced technologies. Since early 2010s, smartphones came into more wide use, and it enabled youth to access social media more convenient, which contributed to spread and share the respective fandoms' common objectives, such as voting or viewing or streaming and so on. And if we mention the Philippines, amongst ASEAN nations, Philippines rank almost top in terms of number of internet users. So it is very prevalent in many audition programs that Filipino social media users are also ardently participating to support their idols or groups to win as a contestant. Next slide, please. So here, I share one example how the fan culture or fandom activity is really realized. So as you see in the slide, the picture shows uh, lots of sacks of rice, because mostly traditionally Korean K-pop fans used to award or gift their idols or groups with flower wreath or some flower standees. But I think in 2014, when TVXQ 동방신기 member Yunho appeared in the musical Gung. And then some international fandoms of TVXQ, including Japanese and other European fans, they gifted with lots of rice to support the orphanage and some welfare facilities. And these rice were named Dreamy. Dreamy in Korean translated into dream rise. So these were perceived more meaningful rather than giving some flowers to Yunho to just personally appreciate his success. And then it also carried positive legacies for Yunho, and it clearly showed that fan activism was operated in a bottom-up model rather than driven by top down or by the agency itself. Next slide, please. So in the next three slides, I will also give three examples in different parts of the world how the politically vigilant K-pop fans also mobilized. So as you see in the slide, in the left side, this shows 방탄소년단 BTS post when there was a huge issue about George Floyd's death and hashtag Black Lives Matters campaign online. Because when BTS posted and BTS showed their interest and support to this BLM movement, army in North America also joined to condemn and donate 1 million US dollars to support Black Lives Matter. Upon their donation, BTS Transculture Fandom Army also proactively expressed their regretful sentiment against racism and also joined to support BTS message towards the BLM movement in and outside the US. So what was driven by the US Army fans is shown in the right side of the image. Next slide, please. And then here, three captured news screenshot are from Thailand. So this is another notable example that Thai K-pop fans' political activism against their government during the COVID-19 outbreak in 2020. Frustrated and dismayed by the central government's incompetent handling of COVID-19, lots of young Thai protesters incorporated K-pop dance and singing K-pop songs into demonstrations and successfully mobilized more crowds and disseminated their message. So I also included the subtitles in English. So if you see, I think the subtitles already appeared, that the first guy above said that the lyrics have good meaning and Thai people love K-pop. So K-pop plays a crucial role in the rally. And then the lady below said, I think we can let the fans outside world, not just domestic Thai people, but outside world know that what Thailand wants now. And then lastly, the guy below said, through Into the New World by Sonyashide, SNSD, in the rallies, I believe we could achieve a truly democratic society. So some similar phenomenon will be also discussed in our paper, but what was really happening in Thailand in 2020 was quite notable and remarkable because especially singing the SNSD song Into the New World was initially by Ihwa Women's University students. When in 2016, when the Ihwa Women's University students were against the Korean government during the corruption and then supposed impeachment movement. So we can see how this transnational movement really happened in and outside Korea through the K-pop and also K-pop fans. And then last example, next slide, please. So this slide shows what happened in Chile. So former student protest leader Gabriel Boric, in the poster, you can see has made history in winning Chile's presidential election, and then it was a big news because, as you see the text on the slide, K-popers collaborated with Boric. So this one shows like how the light sticks were used by K-pop fans, Chilean K-pop fans, and then how he was supported by these Chilean K-pop fans. But if you see the right side, this Chilean internal minister is holding, and there was also some kind of I think report or press release as a government agent that they had some conspiracy theory that Boric was supported by this K-pop fandom, which is not really regarded as legal, or which is not really thought as meaningful group of citizens, because they were against Bori, obviously. So, in one news outlet, they also quoted one of the interviewee. And then, if I just read, many of us who are around my age grew up during the Pinochet dictatorship. So, we have memories from that time, and within one this happened to again. So we can see some parallel happenings in Chile, and later on we will also discuss what happened in the Philippines, and then we can also consider other countries. So from the next slide, Jas will also talk about some background.
Thank you, Mia. Let me now provide the main context of our study, which is the most recent Philippine national elections. So, in the Philippines, elections have always been determined by popularity. The elections are conducted through a nationwide elections based on every voter's ballot. Thus, a candidate's popularity is essential in determining their victory in every election in the country. So, according to Bongkin and Gao, politics in the Philippines has always been about establishing political bulwarks, forging elite alliances, and mobilizing grassroots communities on the ground. So, those candidates who can afford to do such activities would always guarantee a victory in the elections. Next slide, please. So this situation may be different for our international audience, especially for our Korean audience. Um, and this is based on our discussion with Mia. This is something new to her. But in the Philippines, traditionally, candidates go on the ground campaigning and giving out tokens like these. Um, um, Baller. Apart from the sample ballots and platforms, if they have platforms, candidates for elections also give out other materials that would promote themselves, like tarpaulins, shirts, and ballers. Apart from these direct campaign materials and tokens from the candidates, several brands also see the elections in our country as an opportunity for business. So, an example of this would be of the convenience store chain 7-Eleven. So, in 2016, they began to print candidates' faces on their beverage cups, and which they have marketed as a way to promote the national election. So, to give awareness about the national elections. So the choice of cups to use for the beverage that they buy from the store would actually reflect the candidate that they would like to um, vote. So such promotional activities is an opportunity to let customers express their political view. Though in some cultures and countries, such promotional activities that may affect or influence election results are not allowed, in the Philippines, such practices during the elections are accepted. However, they are claimed to be regulated by the Commission on Elections, meaning if we have advertisements or tokens, the cost of these tokens are actually of equal footing among all of these candidates. And that's in the policy of COMELEC. Next slide, please. Next slide. Yes, there. Prior to the most recent national elections, previous slide, sorry. The 2016 election is marked by innovation in terms of the campaigns and discussions in putting forward candidates for election. In the presence of the ever-changing volatile technology and innovation in social media, the Duterte campaign was most visible online and promoting discussions and promotions of the candidates and his leadership experience on social media, primarily on Facebook. So, in the words of Bunkin and Gao in the article that they wrote for the most recent publication of PCS Review, I would like to quote: then presidential candidate Rodrigo Duterte organized his campaign around social media and rallied individuals who were unseen, unheard, and marginalized in mainstream discourse to propel his presidential bid to popularity. Emergent digital publics, such as those who supported Duterte as well as those who were critical of his administration policies, have become a force in contemporary Philippine politics by setting agenda, expressing dissent, and calling for political action. Their capacity to exercise political agency materialize in Twitter trending topics, Facebook groups, YouTube vlogs, and other digital spaces without the gatekeeping of news media nor the mediation of experts, professionals, and other institutional actors. So, based on this, we see now, and sorry, that was the end of the quote. And based on this, we see that social media has a great role as a platform in the political discourse in the Philippines as early as 2016, and such platform has influenced the campaigns also during the most recent elections. Next slide, please. So, the most recent national elections is an extraordinary election because apart from the further innovation and evolution of the political discourse in social media, we were in the middle of the very long global pandemic, which has pushed forward restrictions that has not allowed most of the physical face-to-face activities used for political campaigning prior to the pandemic, like motorcades. But although there were motorcades, they were actually restricted in the earlier part of the campaign. Of course, this situation has amplified social media because virtual discussions and content became alternatives to physical campaigns that reached out to communities. Next slide, please. So the COVID-19 pandemic has also threatened the populist legacy of Duterte, that was according to Tihanki in 2022, and challenged his political identity, messaging, and political party. The former president's rhetoric has shifted from 2016 messaging of eliminating corruption to stating in 2021 that corruption has become endemic in the country and that no one can stop corruption in our country, the Philippines. Further, the national response of the Duterte government did not produce the quality of national subnational coordination required for effective pandemic response, according to Hutchcroft and Guerra in 2022. So this situation called for an opportunity to elect leaders that could overturn the situation in the country. Such sentiments were apparent in online discussions and social media posts that are related to politics. The 2022 national elections, next slide, please. So the election seems to have another innovation in terms of activities and campaigning. The camp of the presidential candidate Leni Robredo, from the time that she was being pushed to file candidacy, which carried over to her campaign, were born out of volunteer groups from different sectors of society. And these volunteer groups launched events such as rallies, palenque tours, dance mobs, and people-to-people campaign, among other activities. These volunteer groups were from different sectors. We have lawyers, teachers, artists, doctors, and handsome individuals. So, mga guwapo for Lenny. So, these sectors formed virtual groups and accounts to be followed by other people or joined in groups in to be followed by other people. These accounts are named blank for Lenny. So we have lawyers for Lenny, teachers for Lenny, doctors for Lenny, mga guwapo for Lenny. And then one of the sectors that we have here would be the K-pop stands or K-pop stands for Lenny. The groups maximize the digital environment in their campaigns, and they can be considered as part of the emergent digital publics that we are talking about. Sorry. As one of the sectors that pushed forward for the campaign of Leni Robredo, these KS4L, or K-pop stands for Lenny, mobilized Filipinos from different K-pop fandoms who were also in favor of her political ideals and platforms. So KS4L made use of activities in K-pop fan culture and utilized these for their campaigns. One of the online mobilization done by the group during the pandemic was a weekly mass reporting hour, which called for reporting of accounts spreading disinformation during campaign period. Such mass reporting activity is something done by fandoms on social media to protect their idol's public image. But apart from this, the sector also adapted several fandom culture in 2022 campaign, which will be discussed later in the paper. So our research questions, next slide, please. Um, the group K-pop stands for Lenny made us curious as it showed hybrid of Filipinos' enthusiasm in political issues as well as K-pop fan culture. With this curiosity, here are two research questions. First, what are the significant strategies demonstrated by KS4L during the 2022 presidential election that exhibit fan activism? And second, how does KS4L experience connect to their identity construction in the Philippine political context? Next slide, please. So, to answer these two research questions, we had two methodologies. First is that we conducted digital ethnography and observed the group accounts, group posts, and interactions um, in Facebook and Twitter. We collected posts and analyzed them through an ethic approach as we are outsiders who are looking into their activities and identities. Second, we conducted an interview among the three core members of K-pop stands for Lenny to be able to incorporate the emic or insider's perspective. Know that I am actually a K-pop fan and I also follow these online accounts, but I could not consider myself as an insider since I am not someone who is part of um, their activities' internal decisions. And so I can still view myself as someone who's in between the insider perspective and outsider. Since the research is qualitative, it is important to remove the bias in the study. And for me, yeah, Dr. Bay is completely unbiased since most of her election experience is Korean and the culture of politics here are new to her. But in my case, I have to distance myself from the data and from the culture where or the subculture of K-pop fandom during the data analysis process. Um, I was able, but that was quite helpful that I am a K-pop fan because I was able to compare the activities and I know the type of activities that are done by K-pop fandoms. Another thing that we have to clarify here in our study is that the selection of the group that we are studying, the K-pop stands for Lenny. So the study was born out of our curiosity about the incorporation of K-pop culture with the Philippines national elections, and it was actually inspired by um, the what was mentioned by Mia a while ago in the background. It just so happened that the K-pop stands for Lenny is the only organized group of K-pop fandom that emerged during the national election. So um, although there are other fans of K-pop that actually are voting for other candidates or that voted for other candidates, this group is the only one that's organized. So, for the study, three members of the core group of KS4L were interviewed. We have Mick, a social media manager, Bia, audio editor, and later on became a caravan coordinator, and Majo, who's in charge of the FB page. So they are people who actually refer themselves as K-pop fans since they are part of different K-pop fandoms. However, they were not part of the same fandoms and they actually just met during the elections, and it was quite interesting for us to know. Anyway, for the next part of the presentation, I turn you over back to Mia.
Okay, so next slide, please. So from this slide, we will present about 5 to 6 themes we examined so far. Let's start from the first theme. As just briefly mentioned, these three informants we interviewed are the main interviewees that we met personally. So, how it all began, they shared how they really started this movement and why and in what circumstance it really started. When the COMELEC has announced on February 13, 2021, that the filing for candidacy for the president was to be held from October 1st to October 8th. And then whether you were supporter of a certain candidate, I think everyone was really anticipating that certain names will emerge. And these people were anticipating that one of those days, Lenny would announce officially that she would run for the presidency. And then it was October 7, 2021, when Lenny officially announced that she would run for president. And it was then the convener of the previous K-pop stands for Lenny, talked to a couple of friends, and then it was finally time for them to take some concrete actions and then create the politically oriented group emerged from K-pop. So if you see the interview quotes on the slides, I just highlighted in yellow. This was spoken by Majo. She said, I will just read the highlighted part. We stumbled upon each other online, and then we decided to merge. And then you can see their relationship was initially online, and then there was one Facebook group, and then there was another Twitter group. So these two accounts decided to merge. And then it was the moment that the birth of K-pop stands for Lenny was really created on Facebook and also Twitter. Next slide, please. So here, interestingly, amongst core members, it was only on March 6, 2022, during the rally in Pasig City, when they really met each other in person, since they formulated this online page and group. In a virtual space, their agenda was shared, and rapport was built, and personal face-to-face interaction came afterwards. In the era of technologies and digital communication, we can see their relationship pattern really shows how they formed this kind of digital intimacy, and then it was forged, and the interconnectedness was quite fast among the participants. And then members from the various Philippine-based K-pop fandoms likewise. Not just romantic relationships, most commonly known in recent years like dating apps or dating sites. Digital intimacy is also widely including what is generated within the digital system. In other words, it is mediated by technological platforms and digital content such as streaming or YouTube live or sharing likes or comments and so on. And then through those behaviors, they share particular emotional intimacy, and then they establish more stronger emotional intimacy. And it is quite obvious when we see how fans build this intimacy toward their celebrity, or between fans or amongst fandoms as well. So, in summary, we can say that in K-pop fandoms, the strong bond connects fans to lead them to do devoted fan labor. And this time, as they united under KS4L, the fan labor became a tool to mobilize united support for Lenny. And then the fandom they belong to, sharing friendship, unity, and comfort, is now somewhat transformed into sharing more solidarity, and then some more camaraderie in terms of their political agenda. Next slide, please. So here, we just quoted what our interviewees also said. When we asked the interviewees whether there was any reference or instance that they looked at in order to design their campaign strategies or any kind of activities, like in previous slides, I showed you BTS army in US and Thai protesters, and also Chilean K-pop fans. These KS4L conveners said they were also aware of anti-government rallies that took place outside the Philippines, including the one in Chile. But it was just their wide knowledge about overseas political movements. So they took these incidents as an example, and they also thought of it what they could really do in this Philippine domestic situation. And they also saw some parallelism, so it was not really surprising to find out that some activities they observed from overseas fandoms or individual fans were already being done by KSFOL themselves. So in short, they didn't really simply copy what was being done somewhere outside, but more reference were came up, and that this reality just empowered themselves because they thought and they came to realize, okay, we are not really only ones doing this in the Philippines, but other K-pop fans in other regions or other continents are also doing what we are thinking of in terms of the ultimate goal, which is politically oriented. So if you see some text in this slide, you can see a bit below part. We wrote here three keywords: empowerment and ownership and volunteerism. So in terms of mobilizing the KS4L participants, they emphasized volunteerism. And then it was also very interesting when they mentioned also when Jas and I looked into lots of social media contents for data collection, we also found this recurring theme, like ending all the fandom wars by Lenny. Or Lenny 선배님 was very interesting because K-pop is political, and their ultimate goal is to win in the election, right? But as the sub agenda, they also included like all this unity, all this united movement can also abolish what was existing in the hatred or the wars between different fandoms. But there was also some kind of criticism and conflict because they were also criticized by some fellow K-pop fans or some outsiders that KS4L is only using K-pop idols just to win in the election or to attract the audience. So it was felt for us during the interview that it's still lingering in their emotions. And then perhaps if we look at other audience or other members of KS4L, perhaps this emotion can be more looked at deeply. Next slide, please. So in this slide, something we didn't really expect emerged during the interview. So in talking about how they felt about the collective push and outcomes, Meek was very vocal about her emotions when she reflected herself being a K-pop fan. So you can read the first part. One thing that kept him going was, I needed to come back with vengeance on people who all hated me when I loved K-pop. So in the yellow highlighted part, she also said, I'm a respectable K-pop stan. I'm not just somebody who screams. So if you are a part of K-pop community in the Philippines or in other countries, you must be aware that there's kind of stigma or there's kind of a stereotype that if you are K-pop fan, you are such such a person individually. So after she actively pushed herself in KS4L and seeing K-pop being a powerful tool to move people to one same direction, she felt very proud, and she regarded that how others looked at her as a K-pop fan previously is now totally looking at her in a different way. Next slide, please. So next slide is in continuation of what we just discussed. So here we gave some examples how K-pop fans are not really respected or sometimes even stigmatized. For instance, there are some terminologies to direct the to underestimate the value of K-pop fans, such as Korea Boo, or like K-pop is only for gays, or K-pop is Badu. It's not really very sophisticated, unlike American pop or other music. And then there was also some local celebrity who said. Filipino K-pop fans don't really understand the lyrics, but they just listen, so it's meaningless and so on. So all these stigma existed. So when they formed this community of practice through volunteerism, and then uniting all different fandoms, despite the existing fandom wars, they felt like where if they were alone they couldn't do it, but since they are together they could really do it, and they are now more empowered, and they can do a more confident way. So in the third bullet, you can see we felt in the interview that this showed solidified K-pop fan identity. So if I just read one of the quotes, what Majo said, she said, we wanted to see them really work for themselves. We're not gonna do it for you, for other participants of KS4L. And then she also explained that how the fandom members really volunteered, and then they really initiated and they were willing to help. So in this example, we could see logistic and financial subsidy was shared by the core members or headquarters, but what really rode the campaign in different cities and provinces was the responsibility of those who willingly participated. So we can see it was really supported by collective voluntary fan labor that felt they were safe within together, and they were comfortable without being attacked or stigmatized, what was usually happening to them. So in the last bullet, you can see the interview quote once again. So this was what they heard from the field when they were doing all the campaign things, and then they were doing legworks. They also encountered non-K-pop people who engaged in the campaign, and then once they heard this from someone, so K-pop fans, you are cool pala. So it made them realize that what they were doing in the field was perhaps regardless of how they really started and what agenda really mobilized this core member of KS4L. They also realized that being a K-pop fan in this particular community is safe, and also very much respectable, unlike before. Next slide, please. So here we also show how our discussion in the interview went on to talk about how they really felt about their identity in the particular in this particular journey. So what made them start and continue this political agenda with K-pop fandoms was because K-pop was basically fun for everyone involved, and it was not really something coercive or tactical to mobilize supporters, but it was very natural and genuine for everyone to bring all of them to the campaign sites as if it was just an extension of a music festival or so. So as you see in the picture, they were holding all different light sticks or the selling merch or streaming the music and so on. Those fan behaviors or fan activities were done for K-pop, but they brought it to support Lenny in this election campaign. And then they also witnessed fandom power really moved altogether beyond usual fan things to do. So at first they thought, oh, it's fun and it's the usual fan things to do. But afterwards, as a secondary effect, when they also engaged non-K-pop fans in the campaign, I think it also boosted the moral in a different way. So here in the interview quote, you can just see in the middle part, Marjo said, "Our identity is not just K-pop fans." And then at the end of the quote, she said, "What got us through is the community that showed concern for the country." So we could feel that their identity, as which started being a K-pop fan, was going beyond just being a K-pop fan. So one last slide for me, please. So here, just to add one more, we also quote what Mika said. She mentioned that she was not personally very passionate or not even updated about local politics prior to joining KS4L to support Lenny. But as a community, as she belonged to this bigger community, she was empowered to learn from other people, which she was not proficient in previous years. And then she also became to value and look up to other people regardless of fandoms or the nature of fan activities. And then in the end, the election result was not what they expected. So they had some time to digest and to reflect on. And then this quote was what she shared. And then this also shows how being a K-pop fan doesn't simply dwell as a motivating factor or something to share, just fun or just the usual fan things. But now how she sees is that her identity in a broader notion. So she used to be stigmatized and she used to feel that being a K-pop fan was rather negative, but she also felt in this political journey there was also stigma to dispel, like misinformation or corruption or some other means that they still need to work on. So we could also feel that in the post-election assessment, she shared that it's not about being a K-pop fan or it's not being about a convener of KS4 anymore, but there's some bigger agenda that they have to move forward and they have to continue doing. So these are some simple themes so far we found out. And then lastly, just we'll just sum up and share some discussion points.
All right. Thanks, Mia. So I'll be sharing the discussion points at. I'm just going to preview how it will be discussed in the paper per research question. So for the first research question, what are the significant strategies demonstrated by K-pop stands for Lenny during the 2022 Philippine presidential election that exhibit fan activism? As mentioned a while ago by Dr. Be, we have observed different fan labors, but one of those that we have observed that is really significant would be some strategies like mass reporting hour to report disinformation posts on social media. Since mass reporting is an activity that is done in the K-pop fandoms to put down malicious social media posts about idols. But in the K-pop stands for Lenny, mass reporting is their concrete way of activism against disinformation, especially about politics-related topics. Another strategy would be in terms of social media, um, hashtag parties. So although it is not only a K-pop fan activity to do to come up with trending hashtags, hashtag parties at certain schedules is actually one of activities of K-pop fandoms to increase the popularity of idols in social media discussion. So K-pop stands for Lenny repeatedly trended hashtags throughout the campaigns, and it aided other groups that came up with hashtags, and it also aided other events that were done or held during the election. So there were a lot of trends during actual call this campaign rallies, and these campaign rallies were streamed live, and there were hashtags during the whole event. And K-pop stands for Lenny actually helped in um, call this in promoting that. Of course, there are other fan labors that were done in actual rallies like Cup Sleeves event and so on and so forth. And these are supposed to be discussed further during or in the paper that will be published later on. Um, Next slide, please. So, for the second research question, how does K-pop stands for Lenny experience connect to their identity construction in the Philippine political context? So, we consider the view of both the outsider and insider as we discuss this. So, the identity that the KS4L assert is not just K-pop fans who happen to is not just K-pop fans who happen to be political. For them, they are Filipinos who love their country and have the same political inclination who happen to be K-pop fans. But being K-pop fans is also part of their identity. They have maximized the fan culture practice of K-pop fandoms in political campaigning and currently in activism, as they see that these practices are actually well managed, well coordinated, and organized. And these people would want to see the practices of, say for example, group orders, cup sleeves events, and hashtag parties and so on, as being organized, and everything is called as transparent. They want to see it as they organize events for activism as well as in the governance in a country. So um the group is also for them, their identity exude is sorry the identity that they exude as a group would be Filipino first, but are also K-pop fans. However, as observed on discussions and tweets in social media, we see people who regard the identity of K-pop stands for Lenny as representing how K-pop fans in the Philippines were voting during that time. And there are some members of fan groups who were saying that they should not put the names of their idols in the Philippine politics because these idols don't have any role in the Philippine politics or the Philippine elections. However, according to K-pop stands for Lenny, and they stand for this, that K-pop is actually political. Again, more discussions on this will be on the full paper. So last slide, please. Thank you. This study was inspired by the dearth of research about K-pop fans and their culture here in the Philippines. Further, the way they form and organize is not much studied, especially in the context of our country. This research contributes to the literature on Filipino K-pop fandom. The investigation can contribute to discussions on how K-pop culture is involved in the K-pop fans' lives, as well as how K-pop has evolved as a subculture outside of Korea. This study can also contribute in the discussion on how K-pop inspired a subculture and their activities. And the K-pop involvement conduct activities mostly led by youth. And as we see in the context of K-pop stands for Lenny, the involvement that these fans immerse themselves in is not enclosed in the context of K-pop fandom only. So they brought their K-pop fan culture to the political campaign. Um, eh, into the political campaign world and have contributed to um, the campaign and popularity of Lenny. If you look back into it, prior to the earlier stages of the campaign, Lenny was not that popular in terms of the surveys, but later on, especially right before the elections, we see the great leap of her popularity. And we believe that K-pop stands for Lenny also contributed to that. We can also inspire studies that would investigate other regions where K-pop is popular. We can look at how K-pop fan culture is different or similar in other countries in the world. Further, we could also investigate later on how K-pop is used in activism in different parts of the world. So there, we hope that our presentation made you curious about our investigation and about how K-pop subculture is reflected in activism and politics. So we hope to hear from you and that we could further improve our study. And on behalf of Dr. Kang Minbei, I'm Jasmine Rambawa, and we would like to thank you for your time.
Thank you very much, Jazz and Mia. That was a very interesting topic. I am reminded of a more recent fandom, yung Aldab. And of course, before that, we have Sharonians, Vilmanians, Noranians, which really shows us how fandom is greatly ingrained, deeply ingrained in our culture. So we'll have more of that. We have some questions prepared for you. Um, I'd like to call back um, Vito, Sexan, and Miko from the first presentation. Welcome back. And we'll address some questions that have been sent in from the YouTube and Facebook comment section. No? Um, First, let's have this is for Sexan. It's from an anonymous viewer on digital diplomacy. Based on previous studies, to what extent is digital diplomacy effective in influencing national or internal policies and in influencing foreign relations or policy making at the international level? Could you give factors that influence the effectiveness of digital public diplomacy?
Right. Thank you very much. I think this is a very important question, and I may have to add to literature review letter about successful factors. I think most of them take kind of two-way and engagement approach. It's not just about post saying that okay, this day Mr. blah blah director of this division doing that, but it's about kind of um, interaction approach. Try to ask what's your opinion or something about kind of like tackle with the current issues or current conversation that takes place in the like social media platforms. So I think this is kind of the key successful factor. But when we go deeper, I think it's about style as well, communication style that kind of less formal and more flexible, and also engage non-state actors or try to engage with the conversations at that time. Also, frequency is another point. I think the country, as I review, I think many the country that post more or more frequent than some other countries can kind of get more engagements than some embassies. And also, I think the last one would be the sender itself, character and policy of the government. Some countries that kind of closed than open may receive kind of let's say less popular engagements than the countries that kind of more open or more democratic. I think this is a very important observation that I found. And I also learned from Ilan Manner's book on the digitalization of public diplomacy that institutional design matters in designing this kind of successful factor. Um, in Asian countries, it seems that most Asian countries kind of take more formal approach on social media platforms. I think including many countries in ASEAN and also China, Japan, and South Korea. While in many Western countries, they kind of, let's say, less formal and more engaged with the audiences. So they open for any kind of conversation, and also they touch upon, let's say, popular issues on media platforms or in the society at that time. So I think these are my answers.
Thank you, Sexan. So I wonder how this government agencies change their, um, their styles in presenting data or information. No, if they see engagement towards with the audience, no. So do they engage more if they see engagements, or do they close again? And what are your thoughts about this?
I think it depends on the content as well, because the character of works of the Ministry of Foreign Affairs themselves, most of them actually kind of formal. It's about
Mhm.
visits, it's about communicate tailor messages. So I think this is
Oh.
kind of depending on the issue itself. But when it comes to kind of tailor messages, I would say that this kind of have more engagements from the audience rather than just saying that, okay, this guy, the head of division, is doing this or that. Yeah, I think this is perhaps this is a kind of new trend that
Mhm.
many embassies are trying to engage. Or I think, yeah, today is like Chinese New Year in Thailand. Some embassies and we should actually like something like try to say that, okay, happy Spring Festival, by avoiding like mentioning Chinese New Year, but they say Spring Festival because in Thailand we celebrate Spring Festival. So I think they try to think about audience more, think about the public in general more than before.
Mhm. So I guess if it's if it's trending, if it's a new trend, some closed traditionally closed agencies or one way engagement are copying. I guess it's making it seems that being more open or being more engaged with the general public is one strategy successful strategy. No, thank you, Sexan. I also have two questions for Vito. This one is these two questions are for are from Celsius Watchon. Sorry. Um, First is, do you think digital diplomacy has encouraged state actors to be more transparent and more protective of their policy standpoints on hot topics? Um, so considering that they are viewed publicly, no. So can you give some examples if you know some? And the second question, if you can tie this up in the context of Philippine Korean diplomacy, have you seen patterns on how the Philippines is represented or imagined on Korean digital platforms, and vice versa, how Korean is represented or imagined on Philippine platforms? So are there points of contentions?
Thank you very much, Mom Ria and Sir Celsius, for the question. So let me try to answer the questions as succinct as possible. Well, for the first question, do I think digital diplomacy has encouraged state actors? I think it has prompted them to be more open and to be more open and protective of their policy standpoints. No, it's not, for me, in my opinion, it's a matter of and rather than or. Okay, because as digital diplomacy prompted foreign ministries to change how they communicate with the public, as I mentioned, you must also recognize that it's not only about state actors. They appeal to a wider range of audiences, which have different opinions, different positions on certain issues. No, so I would say yes, it has prompted them to be more transparent and more protective of their policy standpoints on hot topics and issues. And I think now the concept of virality, no, if something becomes viral, then state actors must have to respond to those issues. Example would be the uh, wolf warrior diplomacy employed by China, no? By the Chinese spokesperson. China has actually used digital platforms to address certain concerns about Chinese behavior as well as push uh, public diplomacy agenda of the Chinese Communist Party, or the government. Another example is the use of Twitter, as I mentioned, for better or for worse, by President Donald Trump to address certain issues. And I think this shows, that the digital platforms are accessible to almost everyone. As I mentioned, it's a matter of you have access, you have internet connection, no, and But we have to also recognize that in the field of diplomacy, it's very hierarchical. No? The decision to respond to certain issues and the crafting of messages and replies pretty much are formulated and influenced by the Home Office. Okay? As much as foreign service posts have the ability to you know to control the pace and the volume of posts in social media sites, they have to seek approval from the Home Office, from the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, from the Department of Foreign Affairs. So all of these things, no, it's basically the practice of diplomacy, but now you're using digital platforms, and there must be some changes. So I think yes, no, it has prompted state actors to be more transparent and more protective. And for the second question, I have yet to see a study on social media patterns in terms of images of both Philippines and South Korea and vice versa. No, I have yet to see that honestly, but interestingly, I came across videos in YouTube by a Korean vlogger, no, asking Koreans, 100 Koreans, when you hear the word Philippines, what do you think of the Philippines? And the common answers that they got, that they received, or that were given by the interviewees, were number one, tourism. And it shows, because if you look at the numbers, the number one tourists coming to the Philippines are South Koreans. Okay? Second, place to study. Okay? And this was attested personally when I was in Korea twice. Okay? I asked several staff from KNDA and KDI, and many of them, at least several of them, mentioned that they went to the Philippines to study English. Okay? Some of them uh, did their collegiate studies here, their tertiary education. So that's second. The third is fruits. No, interestingly, when they hear the word Filipinos, Philippines, they think of mangoes, no, and other tropical fruits. So I think this paints a picture that when they think of the Philippines, they think of the Philippines as a tourist destination. No, uh, but let me add on to that. Also, another interesting anecdote: at least five Koreans, no, asked me what do I think about President Duterte, and this was surprising, no, because I was in South Korea from September to November of this year. We have a new president, right? We elected the new president, but the question was how was the previous president, and even questions on uh, what's the political climate in the Philippines like. So I think there's some sense of consciousness about politics, no? If you also ask them, no, what do you know of the Philippines, they would say Ferdinand Marcos, no, Cory Aquino. So there's some level of consciousness about Philippines, not only about as a tourist destination, but also politically. And so I think we can tap into that. No? But again, this must be supported by evidence. On to how Korea is represented or imagined on the Philippine platforms, I think the study by Dr. Bay and Jasmine partially addresses that question, no? And it really shows that many are into K-pop, so much so that if we go to other countries, we look for famous destinations where K-pop dramas or series are filmed, and then we go there and then we take pictures. No, many Filipinos go to Switzerland because of I forgot the series, but the is that Chloe? Something
Crash
like that,
crash
right?
landing on you. Yeah, crash
Yeah,
landing
Crash
on you.
Landing on
Yes,
You,
yes,
no?
yes.
They go to Switzerland for a Korean series, right? So this actually says a lot about how we view them, and I think this points to the fact that public diplomacy employed or used by South Korean government has been very successful. No, it speaks a lot. It speaks a lot. And I think I'll stop at that, because honestly, I haven't seen any study, so I can't give unvalidated claims. But I hope I was able to answer the questions by Sir Celsius. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Vito. So yeah, and they've maximized, no, tourism organization tourist organizations have maximized this image that we have, or that the outsiders have, of Korea. And maybe for the paper, KRC is willing to support again an offshoot research, no, or a new research project in the future. Okay, thank you. So we have another question for Mike. This is actually asked by Dr. Kyung Min Bae, but I'll read the question and add my own. Although the research aims to characterize and compare social media communication patterns of the two countries' agencies, Mike, since you're also a part of the Department of Linguistics, how do you see that their objectives are achieved amongst international audience, particularly with the language used? No, English is the official medium in many of these agencies. Korean agencies use Korean for domestic audience, and English target and English or the target language of the target country citizens. So, do you suppose the study will result in different conclusions if we consider this factor? So, aside from language use, no, have you considered looking into the language tone of specific topics or and also registers that they use?
Okay, thank you, Besson Sagdim, for the question and the sensei. I would like to highlight that the data that we have now are from the Facebook pages of the Embassy of the Republic of Korea in the Philippines and the Philippine Embassy in Korea. And I will be referencing the information that we currently have. Both pages mainly use English in their posts, and there are very few posts that use Korean and Filipino, and I have not gone through all of them yet to see if there are other languages used, such as other Philippine languages. This study, in my opinion, may probably not reach a different conclusion in terms of their respective digital diplomacy plans, but the use of language may inform digital diplomacy. So, what we can glean from the data for now is that we are looking into just one dimension of the digital diplomacy plans of the two countries during the 6 year period. An important question or questions that we, the researchers, would ask next as we delve into the study further, perhaps are when and why do these institutions choose to shift to another language, and what is their intent for doing so? Because as we know, language includes and at the same time excludes. So I think it may probably be perhaps a deliberate choice to use one language over another, or to use both languages in one post, which is probably due to their consideration of their intended audience and the content of their post. Case in point, yung Embassy of the Republic of Korea in the Philippines Twitter account, which is now inactive since February 2014. All posts are in Korean. So they might probably have a different plan for that page, but now it's inactive. Also, their choice of language, I think, is a step towards fulfilling their institutional objectives in the social media realm. And this would really be an interesting aspect to this research. So the next phase would be to investigate the DFA, MOFA, NCCA, and KCC pages. And then there's a question ni Ria Sensei. In terms of the language register and tone, and in terms of emotions, I think the language used in both pages are very much neutral. But an interesting point to consider is to check the sentiments and emotions in the comments and replies of the audience, because it's equally interesting because of the emotionally charged responses, mainly for now, I think, concerning consular services, administrative processes, which are totally unrelated to the or to the post.
I see.
So thank
Thank
you,
you, Mike.
Ria Sensei.
Mm-mm.
Yes,
Thank you, Mike. I guess we have new abstracts to write, guys, or proposals to write. Thank you to the first presenters now, Vito, Sexan, and Nico. Let's move on to the questions for the second presentation for Jazz and Mia. Um, we have a question from Dr. Eric Capistrano. Siguro Mia can answer this, tama, no? This question. Um, PH politics are personally related as opposed to issue or platform based. I think this is a very critical factor, says Dr. Capistrano. So, what are your opinions or thoughts about this?
This is also what we crucially considered, and then this is why when just presented the local landscape, how the political, especially presidential campaigns, really unfold in the Philippines, because we witness the the so-called gimmick always exist in the Philippines, like uh, uh, people want to support certain candidates by buying certain merchandise like hat or t-shirt or bowler, or even the the 7-Eleven, the smoothies that you want to buy it, and then you want to support a certain candidate. So this is very much personality
Mm,
oriented support we also witnessed. And then I think this in terms of K-pop fandoms or K-pop fans behaviors, since our focus was only K-pop stands for Lenny, and in fact they were the only ones which really had maximized their involvement through K-pop. I think we cannot really generalize how this personality related issues in the Philippines can be related to K-pop, but certainly we can see the local context in depth, so that we can connect to what we want to discuss further in terms of K-pop stands for Lenny's advocacies, and then also the outcome of the election.
mhm. Okay, let me add another question for Mia. From this one is for from Aldrin, no, for from Dr. Lee. Um, did you see did you see or learn about any attempt from the government to influence the political directions of the fandoms?
I can briefly answer, and then maybe Just can
Yeah.
also add something else. Since this K-pop stands for Lenny was fandom initiated campaign, and then it was really bottom up, grassroots
Mhm, mhm,
initiated movement. I think we cannot say there was um, um, any involvement by the government, or even because Lenny was then vice president, there was not such interaction in terms of top-down
mhm,
engagement. But what our interviewees mentioned was that whenever they had a decision made by KS4L, and then whenever they planned certain campaigns, and then whenever they chose the campaign sites, the headquarters of Lenny was really smoothly coordinating with
mhm,
KS4L. So it was really KS4L that made a decision and planned rather than the other way around.
mhm. Okay, thank you, Mia's. Jazz.
Yeah. Um, Really, this is coming from the ground, the movement of fandoms. So, if if the question is if there is for the current government like reaching out to some K-pop fans to organize or influence them, there's none. Um, if there are pro-government K-pop fandoms, there are, and we
Mhm,
see them in discussions as well. But they are not as organized and
mhm,
as organized as this group, and they are not formed and like united as this group. K-pop stands for Dani, which is now K-pop stands for good governance. So KS for GG na sila right now.
okay, so Jazz, I'd also like you to comment and also and answer. No, see, Dr. Capistrano has another question or commentary. The hope for a safer space to stand under the administration, the insight of having a hope for a safer space to stand under the administration of their chosen candidate as a motivation to campaign for Lenny. Is this a correct observation?
Yes, actually, I think this is from one of the slides also of Mia, that whenever they go to campaigns, and people who are not part of K-pop fandoms, they are being welcomed and they are not being belittled. And this is something that they experience really. But apart from that, the core group of K-pop stands for Lenny. They are really call this looking into the platform of they really look into the platform of whoever is the candidate. And for them, they voted or they campaigned for Lenny Robredo because they think that she has like
Mm,
a good economic platform. And also one of the things that they said is that they want, because K-pop standing is actually expensive, and they want to have a government that has a like call this that can actually help them afford being a K-pop fan. So yeah, so this is something that is they are looking into, and they are inspired to campaign for her. They were inspired to campaign for her, and now for good governance, because having a good country and good economy can actually also help them as fans. So this was part of also our discussion.
mhm. So I think that's the main difference of the previous fandoms, no, yung ating personality
Mm.
politics, where Sharonians were ano ba? Hindi naman siguro pressured, but they followed the suit of their idol to support another
Yeah.
candidate, not the Sharonians deciding on their own to promote a specific candidate, no?
Yes, yes. That's
So
how they
parang
are.
very pure, no?
Yes.
Talagang driven nung kanilang ano, mga
Their cause, yes.
causes and yung hope for kung ano man yung nakikita nila na better politics for the country.
Yes.
Okay. Another, siguro this will be the last question. Maybe Jazz and Mia can have say from Celsius, no? What do you think are the prospects of K-pop in the context of identity politics? Would it unify or divide? So unfortunately, my feelings. Unfortunately, Lenny lost. Sorry. How do the K-pop fans you interviewed define success of their movement? So did you have a
Mm-mm.
post interview, kumbaga? And what
Ah.
reflections we can learn from them?
Yeah, actually, the interview happened after the election, so they are all call this the campaign already, as a campaign they already lost. But let's answer first the first question. No, I think this type of fandoms, kasi we cannot say that they really will unify politics. They can unify fandoms, but politics in the Philippines, you cannot unify it really. It's quite difficult to unify, call this politics or government or parties. But when it comes to subcultures and groups within subcultures, I think that's what they were able to unify.
Mm,
Because sometimes these fandoms, they have wars or they are competing for music shows. But even if they are competing for music shows, they have a unified like goal to campaign for a candidate, and that's what they did. Um, and it's quite difficult to say that they are going to call this to come up with like an innovation for identity politics. I'm not really sure. I don't think it will follow really. I think based on how we have observed it, it's really what I have been saying a while ago. They are unifying fandoms and not really political views. In terms of defining success, I think based on what they said, no, they don't feel that their movement was a failure, because actually they were able to mobilize a lot of people. Their Facebook group, sorry, yeah, their Facebook page and their Twitter pages are now rebranded to K-pop stands for good governance, because I think what they said during the interview was, even if Lenny did not become a president, we still need good governance, and good governance is an aspiration forever. And so this is something that they want to have, and I think they're still working on it, and they are still active currently. So what do we what are our reflections, or what can we learn from this? I think a lot actually. Mobilizing people from the ground, using the practices of fandoms is something that we can learn so much from this group, because you see they are very organic, and I actually see that they tend to be like, they are not pushing you to join them. There is no, like, when during our interviews, we did not feel that they are pushing people to join them. They are just finding themselves within their group, and that's actually something that's quite interesting to look into. Mia, you have things to add, or do you have other comments?
Um, I have nothing much to add, but I just wish to say we started this research not to essentialize or not to glorify whether success or failure happened to a certain candidate, but what we really wanted to do was to look into the phenomenon, why this is really happening, because we already knew this was happening in Thailand, Chile, or US or any other countries, but it also happened like in the parallel universe. So we really wanted to look at Filipino K-pop fans and Philippine-based K-pop fandoms. So I think we have to avoid essentializing or too much generalizing what really happened, or either black or white, black and white. So but the comment and question is very helpful to go back to our data, and then we will certainly consider what you ask us.
Hello, Yan. Thank you, Mia, for that input. And I think we have some more questions, but we are running out of time. So for the questions who were not asked, or panelists, no, you can contact them directly, or they may answer the reply to your comments on the chat section. No, okay. So thank you again for the inputs of our viewers. And at this point, I'd like to give the certificate of appreciation. First, let's have the first presentation to Jovito Jose Katigbak, Sexan Anantasirikyat, and Michael Esmanahan for presenting the research paper titled Advancing Public Diplomacy Amid Digitalization, Comparing Social Media Communication Patterns of Select Philippine and South Korean Agencies at the 8th Philippine Korean Studies Symposium organized at the University of Philippines Korea Research Center and the Department of Linguistics at the University of the Philippines Diliman, given today, the 21st of January 2023, signed by Dr. Kyungmin Bay, OIC Director of UPKRC, and Dr. Maria Cristina Gallego, Chairperson of the UP Department of Linguistics, and to our second presentation. We'd also like to award this certificate of appreciation to Jasmine Sabrina Rombawa and Kyungmin Bay for presenting the research paper titled Your Cool Pala, Politicized Filipino K-pop Fan Culture and Fandom Identity Construction at the 8th Philippine Korean Studies Symposium, organized by the University of the Philippines Korea Research Center and the Department of Linguistics at the University of the Philippines Diliman, given on the 21st of January 2023, signed by the chairperson of the Department of Linguistics, Maria Cristina Gallego, and the OIC Director of UPKRC, Dr. Kyungmin Bay. Yun. Maraming salamat muli sa inyo. And of course, we look forward to our presenters. Now, we look forward to reading your full papers soon, and the possible offshoot projects, no, that have come up during the discussion. Okay. Thank you very much again. Um, yeah. So with that, no, we formally conclude PKSS Day 1 of 3 days of symposium. Thank you very much, everyone, for joining us today. Those who wish to receive a certificate of attendance, kindly fill up the evaluation. The link is being posted in the comment section of the YouTube channel and of the department's or UPKRC's YouTube channel and Facebook page. And then you will be given a certificate via email. And then next Saturday, January 28th, we have a keynote speech at 10 a.m. and student presentation and UP KRC core research project presentation, which will continue during the afternoon session. So stay tuned via the UP Linguistics and KRC pages for more details. Again, thank you to our speakers, our keynote speaker this morning, our discussant, and our panelists and students, no alumni, for their presentations this afternoon, and to you who joined us during the live stream. So, see you again and kamsahamnida. Maraming salamat po.